So, Paul, let me know.
Okay, stand by. Okay, we're rolling and coming up in 3, 2, 1.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm getting feedback here, Paul. Do we want to? Yeah, I don't have anything here. Oh, that's what's going on. Okay, great. Thank you. Is that better? Okay. Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Scher. I'm the current chair of the Ashland Select Board. Welcome to the. Can you hear me all right?
No, it's not
Everything
coming through the room. Hey, Paul, it's not coming through the room, bud. I hear it back here.
All right, can everybody hear me? I've been called a loudmouth, so, okay. Welcome to our public forum on the 40B, proposed 40B project, the sanctuary at Ashland Mills. And I just want to introduce kind of the process tonight and some general introductions. So again, my name is Rob Scher. The other members of the Select Board are here. Claudia Bennett, Brandy Kinsman, Joe Mignani. Yolanda Greaves will be joining us shortly. Of course, Town Manager Michael Herbert is up front here with Peter Matchik, our planner. We have a number of presentations here. Tonight, we're going to start, we brought in Paul Haverty, who will be following me at the microphone. Paul is an attorney who's going to spend some time talking about the 40B process and how it works, which is, it's a new process for most of us, so I think it's a good idea to go through that. So that'll give you a good background on what, how this process works. And then, as you know, Michael and his staff have been working very hard to set up a public comment portal, and Michael's going to spend some time talking about the process and the gathering of public information and what we've heard so far from the public and what they've put together. That will lead us into a presentation by Jeff Engler, who was the developer in this case, who will talk about his project. And Jeff has kindly agreed to listen to comments and take potentially questions. And following Jeff's, and I should say that Paul likes to have questions during his presentation, so he helps that. So feel free to raise your hand. And I think, Michael, are you going to try to repeat? Well, you probably should repeat the question. So one of the issues, we have people in the room, they won't be able, the technology won't necessarily pick up your question, so that's why it'll be repeated. And people at home on Zoom, if you use the raise hand function, will recognize you and allow you to take your question. So, so following Jeff, the developer's presentation, we will be opening it up for questions and observations. Now, I do want to say, we're here, this is a public forum, we want to hear what people are thinking and your questions, but try to, I guess, we're going to explain the 40B process, and I know there's emotions and a lot of concerns and valid concerns, but try to be as constructive and as direct in your questions as you can. You're going to hear about the input, and I think it's, if you agree, like traffic is going to problem, say that, but don't spend a lot of time repeating what we've already said about traffic issues, for example. If you've got something new to add, that's great. If you have a certain observation you want to go on the record with, that's wonderful. But just keep in mind we have a limited time and a number of people want to make comments. So if I think you're kind of going on too long and repeating things, I will have to ask you to stop and move on, okay? So when we get to the public question and answer period, we will ask for raised hands, I think both remotely and here. See who wants to talk and kind of do like a time limit based on the number of comments. So anyway, does that sound good to everybody? Everybody loves it? Okay, great, okay. So without further ado, I'm going to, Michael, did I miss anything that you wanted to talk about tonight?
No, the only thing, Rob, when we get to the, public comment question portion, I think it's important for people to know, so we have set up like Rob called a comment portal with a form that you can fill out with your comments. So that's the official way that we're going to use to get comments to mass housing. So just want to
Yeah,
reiterate
that's great.
that.
And I also, and you read it, it says we're going to forward the entire text of what you say, right? So that's going to go unvarnished in the comments. So keep that in mind when you write something. So anyway, okay, so
They've been PG-13 so far.
that's great.
so.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. Just let me get the PowerPoint set up here.
Oh, sorry. Peter, did I introduce you? I may have left you out. Peter Matchick's our town planner. He doesn't want to be.
That's not it.
Okay.
No,
But he's helping us do things and taking.
All right, Peter, what happened? That's the wrong PowerPoint.
there you go. Oh, there you go.
No, you shouldn't have left me in charge of that.
While they're getting set up, I do want to repeat something Joe just reminded. If you're on Zoom and want to speak, please put your video on, or because then we'd be more comfortable recognizing you. We've had a number of Zoom bomb incidents, so we want to make sure that everybody's legit to the extent we can. Okay, so I'd ask you, please, unless you've got a really strong reason, put your video on Zoom when you want to speak, okay?
No.
And have a good name that identifies yourself, that seems reasonable. All right, thank you.
All right, sorry for that. So my name is Paul Haverty. I am an attorney at Blattman, Bobrowski, Haverty, and Silverstein out of Concord, Massachusetts. I've been practicing in the 40B area for 23 years now. I've represented both developers and municipalities. I've represented municipalities as town council, as special town council, and as a technical review consultant, which is from something that is sponsored by the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. They provide funds for boards of appeals to get representation from 40B technical experts. So I've got a lot of experience representing municipalities, a lot of experience representing developers, and basically 80+% of my practice over the last 23 years has been in the area of Chapter 40B. So this is a PowerPoint presentation that has been developed through Massachusetts Housing Partnership. I've had some input into this. I've tried to make it a little bit more geared towards what we're doing tonight, but this was originally developed as a training for boards of appeals. So this is really looking at the Board of Appeals role in the process. But with that being said, I'm happy to answer questions above and beyond whatever's on this presentation.
So, hey, Paul, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt, but just before you go on, what's on the screen here is not what's on the screen
Okay,
here.
well, that's not
So
helpful.
I'm just going to make sure that. Here we go.
Is it kicking in?
Should we just put the PowerPoint up and I can do it from PowerPoint?
It's so people can share online.
While we're doing that, there was a slight technical issue with the link in the town manager's newsletter. So if you have anybody who's you're in contact with who's having trouble getting on the Zoom, refer them to the link that's in the agenda for this meeting on the town meeting website. Also, should things get crowded, we do have space available downstairs. I think we're okay for now, but we do have an overflow room downstairs.
Okay.
Hold on a sec, folks.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. It wouldn't be a hybrid meeting or a Zoom meeting if we didn't have these. There you go. Looks good. There you go.
Okay.
All right, Peter, where is my presentation on here?
So I have it up on the screen.
Okay, but I can't see it on there, so I want to just, there you go. Okay.
There you go.
Do one thing in terms of, and Michael will address this as we go through, there's a ZBA process as part of this. This is, I do want to say that this is, oh, I'm sorry, I do want to say that this is a unique process to have a forum like this for 40B. So we thought it was important to get public input and to communicate and be as transparent as possible about this. But there's a whole nother process, which Michael will talk about, involving the ZBA, the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the regular review process for this. So, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So the first slide addresses eligibility and submission requirements, and this is, I think, where you are at with regards to multiple applications that may be pending. They're in front of the subsidizing agency. Before an applicant is allowed to file a comprehensive permit with your Board of Appeals, they first have to get a project eligibility letter from one of the 4 qualifying subsidizing agencies. So those 4 subsidizing agencies are the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, Mass Housing, Mass Housing Partnership, and Mass Development. All right, you can change.
You want to go back? Yeah. Stay
So there are actually some statutory safe harbors that a board can claim when there's an application that's filed in their town. The most commonly known one is the 10% year-round housing unit minimum. There's also the 1.5% total land area minimum. And then there's also the 0.3% of total land area zoned in the community for residential, commercial, or industrial use, or 10 acres, whichever is larger. I will admit I have never seen that safe harbor claimed. I don't know what the process would be for establishing whether or not a municipality complies with it. It seems unlikely that any municipality could comply with it, because if they could, then it would have been claimed. The statute has been on the books for more than 50 years now, and I'm not aware of a single time where it's been applied. In addition...
Pause. I'm sorry, just to ask you a question. Can you explain what safe harbor is?
Yes. So I will actually get into this.
Oh, sorry.
A little further in. There is a process that a Board of Appeals has to follow when there is a safe harbor that they can claim. So I will get to that in a short bit. But in addition to the statutory safe harbors, there are a number of regulatory safe harbors. So there's the Housing Production Plan safe harbor. So what that is if a town adopts what is essentially an affordable housing plan and then creates affordable housing, either 0.5% of your total year-round housing units in 1 year, you would get a 1-year safe harbor. And if you approve 1% of your total year-round housing units, you get a 2-year safe harbor. There's also the recent progress towards housing unit minimum. So that is a 2% standard, and it's based upon the 12 months preceding the filing of a comprehensive permit application. So if the town has approved up to 2% of your total year-round housing units as affordable units in the 12 months prior to the filing of an application, the board can assert a safe harbor. And so to clarify, safe harbor basically will allow a board to either deny a project or approve it with conditions, even if those conditions render the project uneconomic, and that decision would not be able to be overturned by the Housing Appeals Committee on an appeal. There's also a large project safe harbor, so it's based upon the number of year-round housing units per community. and I think it goes up to 300 units. And then there's the related application safe harbor. So the related application safe harbor was put in place to prevent developers from proposing a standard development, a 40A development, and using Chapter 40B as a way to threaten the municipality to allow them to approve the 40A development that they've proposed. This requires that a developer wait 12 months from the end of any process, approval process for not only housing, but it could be a commercial development and industrial development, as long as that proposal didn't have a minimum of 10% affordable housing. If it had a minimum of 10% affordable housing, then this safe harbor would not be applicable. So then we get to this, please.
So when you say related applications, is that by the same developer, or if it's two
It doesn't matter if it's the
projects
same
coming into
developer.
town at the same time?
It's a related application for construction on the same property.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And the goal is to prevent a developer from coming in with a standard, 40A project, and then during that process saying, well, if you don't approve this,
I'm
then
gonna
we're going to
turn it-
go
okay.
forward with a 40B.
Okay.
Well, you can, but you've got to withdraw your project and then wait 1 year. Which can be an issue, because that also means that if a developer gets a project that's approved and it gets appealed, you have to wait until that appeal is resolved before that 1 year safe harbor even starts running.
Okay.
So it has some teeth to it, that safe harbor provision. So there are important submission requirements for 40B applications. The first is that you have to look at the status of the developer. Are they a public agency? So that would be a situation where if you had a local housing authority that was proposing a development, they could be a nonprofit, or the most common type of application is filed by a limited dividend organization. So all that really entails is a developer agreeing to limit the profit on their development consistent with the standards of the subsidizing agency. Need to provide evidence of site control. Site control is actually a part of the process with the subsidizing agency when you go for project eligibility. They will make a determination as to site control. That determination is considered to be conclusive unless there are some issues with regard to site control that arise after the determination has been made. And then the regulations have a process for Board of Appeals or the Housing Appeals Committee or anyone to refer it back to the subsidizing agency to make a determination as to whether or not that site control remains in place. And then finally, the applicant has to provide a copy of a project eligibility letter from a qualifying subsidizing agency. Other 40B application submittal requirements, preliminary plans versus final plans. So Chapter 40B only requires a developer to submit preliminary development plans. They do not have to be final detailed development plans. And the purpose of this is to allow an applicant to come in really with something along the lines of a sketch design for the board to review and give their approval, and then the final detailed plans would actually be submitted post-approval. Those plans have to include existing site conditions and a locus map, preliminary scaled architectural drawings, a tabulation of proposed buildings by type, size, and ground coverage. If the developer is proposing a subdivision, then you have to include a preliminary subdivision plan. A preliminary utilities plan has to be submitted, and a list of requested waivers. So I think it's helpful to discuss the waivers, because this is one of the main selling points of Chapter 40B for developers, is that the developer has the right to come in and request a waiver of any local rule and requirement that prevents them from doing their development as proposed. Chapter 40B allows the developer to come in and do that, but they've got to provide you a list. When I'm representing a board on a 40B application, 95% of the time, when I review a waiver list, I find that it's incomplete. I always ask a Board of Appeals to go back to the developer and request for them that they actually be more specific with their waiver requests. And the reason for that is at the end of the day, if there's an appeal filed of the board's decision, what's going to be looked at is whether or not that determination was arbitrary and capricious. And if the board is unaware of the scope of the waivers that it has granted, then that leaves them in a vulnerable position as to whether or not their decision was arbitrary and capricious. I never encourage boards to grant blanket waivers of local rules and requirements. Local rules and requirements apply to local bylaws. So if there is a local wetlands bylaw, a local Board of Health requirement that's more restrictive than Title V, and things of that nature, the Board of Appeals sits in the board of the local boards, grants those permits, but the Board of Appeals does not grant state-level permits. So the Conservation Commission retains all of its jurisdiction under the Wetlands Protection Act. The Board of Health retains all of its jurisdiction under Title V. The Building Commissioner retains all of his jurisdiction under the State Building Code. So it's only local rules that can be waived as part of the 40B process.
Paul, so this is an affirmative, a process that the developer will list specifically what they're requesting to waive of local rules. Is that what you just
That
said
is
in terms of the
correct.
process? And so the ZBA would look at those carefully and make a determination of whether we want to uphold the local rules.
So when I'm representing a Board of Appeals, at the end of the process, we will go through the waiver list one by one, and the Board of Appeals will vote on each and every waiver request. This is sort of getting into what I'll be discussing later, but the
Sure.
Board of Appeals has to keep in mind when it's reviewing the waiver request that a denial of a waiver that's going to render a project uneconomic will likely result in an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee, and then they will have to be able to show an issue of local concern that outweighs the regional need for affordable housing that supports that waiver denial. So it's a balancing test that the board's going to have to do when it's making that determination.
Thank you.
You can skip to the next one. So noticing and conducting the required public hearing. So there's a number of different figures on this screen. You can skip to the next one. So Chapter 40B performance requirement deadlines. So some of these deadlines are actually more aspirational than they are a strict requirement. Some of them, however, if a board fails to comply with them, could result in a constructive approval. So the first one is distribute the application to other local boards within 7 days. That's aspirational. At no point are you ever, even if the board never distributes applications to other boards, it's not a basis for finding that the board's decision was improper or that a constructive approval would occur. It's helpful for the board to distribute this to other boards as soon as it can, because it's going to be looking for input. The Board of Appeals, again, is sitting as all local boards on a comprehensive permit application, but the board's going to want input from the other boards that generally would review this type of application. So the sooner you get this information out to those boards, the sooner you get that input and the quicker you get through this process. And that will become clear as to why that's important in a minute. Within 14 days of receiving the application, you want to file your notice of public hearing, and you want to publish in a newspaper of general circulation in town. And that is important because the next one is you have to open the public hearing within 30 days of the filing of the application. I will note that is an ongoing question in terms of whether simply showing up, scheduling a public hearing, showing up and saying we're continuing is sufficient to constitute the opening of a public hearing. There's a couple of cases currently pending at the Housing Appeals Committee that make the argument that that is not a public hearing, that in order to have a actual public hearing, there needs to be an ability for the project proponent to make a presentation and argue their case to the board. So I would not recommend a board ever do that. They should always allow at least an initial presentation. Safe harbor notification. So this we touched upon a little bit earlier. There is a process in which within 15 days of opening the public hearing, the Board of Appeals needs to provide written notification to the applicant if it is claiming any one of the either statutory or regulatory safe harbors. Failure to comply with this process means that the board loses its right to claim that safe harbor. If the applicant disagrees with the board's assertion of safe harbor, they have the right to file an appeal to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities within 15 days of the notification by the board. The Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities then has 30 days to provide their decision, and that decision can be appealed by either side to the Housing Appeals Committee in an interlocutory appeal. If there is an interlocutory appeal filed with the Housing Appeals Committee, that's automatically going to stay the local hearing, and it won't be, you won't be able to proceed on it until that appeal has been resolved. There's no appealing the decision of the Housing Appeals Committee on the interlocutory appeal until it's been remanded back to the board. The board has gone through the full hearing process, has issued a decision. That decision is then appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee. Housing Appeals Committee yet again issues a decision, and then that safe harbor issue can be part of an appeal to either Superior Court or Land Court. Once the board has opened the public hearing, it has 180 days to close the public hearing. And this process is going to move very quickly. And failure to comply with this process and close the public hearing within 180 days can result in a constructive approval. Again, something the board wants to make very, very sure doesn't happen in its process. It can be extended by agreement of the applicant and the board. That is actually a very common situation. Applicants will quite frequently agree to extensions of the 180-day period because it can be difficult to get through all of the information that's necessary to get through in one of these hearing processes. And it may be that there just isn't enough time, and the applicant is going to run the risk, if they refuse to extend that hearing, of a board issuing a decision that basically states that they didn't have sufficient information. So that's going to be an ongoing question throughout the process. But what the Board of Appeals should do when they're reviewing a comprehensive permit application is make sure that they are moving as quickly as they can. They're retaining peer review consultants. They're identifying all of the issues that need to be identified and reviewed, and that they're holding public hearings as frequently as they possibly can. Once the public hearing has closed, did someone have a question?
Nope.
No. Once the public hearing is closed, the board has 40 days to deliberate, which has to be done in public, but it cannot accept any more testimony from the applicant or from the public during that deliberation process. And then it has to render its decision and file it with the town clerk within that 40-day period. Once the decision has been filed, the appeal process, the appeal route is 20 days, and I'll get to the different types of appeals that can be filed from the board's decision. Scheduling a site visit. So it's fairly common in planning board hearings, conservation commission hearings, even board of appeals hearings, that a site visit is scheduled so that the board members can get a sense as to exactly what they're faced with. It's helpful to have certain issues marked. It's nice to have the proposed roadway marked, location of buildings marked. If we're talking about particularly tall buildings, you may actually ask the applicant to do a balloon test so that people can actually judge what the height of the building will be when they do that site walk. It should be done early in the process. And yes, certainly.
Can you tell us where our town stands in this whole scheduling situation? Have we done all of this?
So if you're talking about one of the pending applications, my understanding is nothing has been filed yet. So the process, again, as I stated at the beginning, is you have to obtain a project eligibility letter from a qualifying subsidizing agency. So I think that that's where they are in the process right now. An application for a comprehensive permit with the Board of Appeals cannot be filed until the applicant has that project eligibility letter in hand. So we're not at that stage yet. Again, so a site visit, it helps the Board of Appeals understand the site and the neighborhood existing conditions. the proposed site plan and building design. And it also helps them look, they can, as part of a site visit, with the permission of abutting property owners, you can go onto abutting properties and take a view as to how, they are going to be impacted by the proposal. Retaining peer review consultants. So this is very important. The Board of Appeals has the right to require the applicant to fund what's known as a Chapter 44, Section 53G account to allow for the board to retain outside consultants, independent consultants, to review materials that are submitted by the applicant. So that can include civil engineering, traffic, architecture, and in certain circumstances, financial peer review. The Board of Appeals cannot have a peer review consultant review studies that were not prepared on behalf of the applicant, and it cannot have a peer review consultant prepare their own studies. If a Board of Appeals or a town wants separate studies to be performed, they certainly have the right to pay for those studies themselves, but they can't require the applicant to pay for them as part of this process. All written records and reports are to be made part of the record. Yes, sir?
Does that include environmental peer reviews?
Yes. Yep.
Paul, sorry to ask a question. So you have on the list here financial peer reviews?
Yes.
Are you talking about like a fiscal impact analysis or an analysis of the
So-
developer's pro forma?
It's a pro forma review.
Okay.
And there are specific standards that have to be followed before you're allowed to conduct a pro forma review. And what that requires is the Board of Appeals would have to have completed all peer review and have prepared and submitted to the applicant a draft decision that contains all conditions and waiver decisions. And if the applicant, after reviewing that draft decision, indicates to the board that they believe it renders the project uneconomic, the Board of Appeals can then engage a consultant to review a pro forma provided by the applicant.
Gotcha. And because
But you have to make sure you leave enough time in the process to get there, because if at the last meeting, the board says, here's a draft decision, if you don't like it, then we're going to require a peer review, well, the applicant's not required to extend the 180-day period to allow that. So if you're thinking at the beginning that at some point you may want to do a financial peer review, then you got to make sure you get through the process quickly enough to be in a position where you can do that. The other thing I wanted to point out in terms of a fiscal impact analysis is I recommend that boards never require those, because the main driving factor in the fiscal impact analysis is school impacts. And the Board of Appeals should never be looking at impacts on schools when reviewing an affordable housing development, because that's a great way to back yourself into a fair housing action.
Okay.
So I never recommend that. And frankly, they're not helpful because I don't think you're going to find two consultants who are going to agree, and the public's never going to agree, in particular on the school age, the number of school age children.
Okay.
in my
And I
experience.
think it's important to note, so when you talk about reviewing the pro forma, so there are certain, for lack of a better term, profit limits that developers have with relation to 40B projects, right?
So you wouldn't really be looking at the profit limitations. Instead, you would be looking at the uneconomic thresholds. So basically, on a home ownership development, the threshold is 15% return on total cost. And on a rental development, it's tied to the 10-year Treasury yield. I think it's 4.5 points above the 10-year Treasury yield. Is that right, Jeff? Yes. So those are the minimum economic thresholds. So what the board is going to want to do if they conduct a financial peer review is determine whether or not the decision that they're imposing puts the development below those thresholds.
Gotcha.
My recommendations to boards, first of all, I don't find financial peer review generally to be helpful. My recommendations to boards are, if you want to include conditions on a development and a developer is objecting to them, make sure that you believe that those conditions are supported by genuine issues of local concern. And then if they are, it doesn't matter whether they render the project uneconomic or not.
Okay.
Makes it interesting. Thank you, Paul. I think we had, I see Anna's question, but Joan, did you still have a question from?
I did. It's from the review of studies prepared on behalf of the applicant, not
The town cannot require the developer to pay for their peer review consultants to do independent studies. The town absolutely has the right to pay for their own independent studies.
And I just want to,
Repeat questions so that people at home can.
yeah,
sorry,
just a note of that.
Should have been doing that.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Anna, and
Good evening, Paul. I apologize for my late arrival. I'm a planning board member, but this question is more as a resident. So, as I understand it, the presentation so far is about the obligations of the zoning board of appeals, the deadlines, what we can and cannot do. For example, we can't have a study on school impact. That would not be appropriate for them.
Microphone. Anna.
Sorry,
So-
I guess
let me just know, we do have a microphone available. Looks like we just got it. I'm sorry, go ahead. So, but the microphone, in my understanding, will not, is not audible to people on Zoom. Is that right, Paul?
It's low, yeah.
Okay, but go ahead, Anna. This will record your question for posterity,
should I
so.
repeat?
No, I think you
Okay.
can just keep going, get to the
Um,
question.
So as I understand it, there's limitations on the zoning board of appeals and what they're allowed to do. And I think you mentioned that because of the fair housing laws, they're not allowed to do a school impact study. So as I understand it, that phase, the zoning board of appeals phase comes later. And right now, we're in the pre-letter phase, where basically we as a community could, in theory, negotiate with the applicant, do our own studies, and work with the applicant to kind of discuss conditions prior to the zoning board of appeals. Is that correct? And will you be doing those negotiations? And is the community allowed to do studies on school impacts during this phase?
So I'm going to boil that question down to, is the community allowed to do studies on school impacts? And again, my recommendation is that the community does not do that type of a study, because again, it's a great way for a community to back its way into a fair housing claim. There's no specific prohibition in the regulations, in the statute, against a municipality conducting a fiscal impact study or school impact study. However, the HAC has years of decisional law indicating that's not an appropriate item for a Board of Appeals to review, and would not be a legitimate reason for either denying or conditioning. So if there's no real benefit to a municipality to do that type of study, I would suggest that you avoid it, because there is a legitimate downside, again, which is the potential for a fair housing action.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to note that we are intending to have our town council represent us in this process, right, Michael? So
That's correct.
we have someone who has experience in the 40B process, so.
And who I used to work for.
Great.
I guess I don't.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
I guess I don't, I mean, what's more important than a school impact in terms of development?
So the question is, what is more important than a school impact in terms of development? Health and safety, I think, is probably more important than school impact, but leaving that aside, again, it's not a legitimate basis for issuing a decision under Chapter 40B. If there's an impact to the schools, the Housing Appeals Committee has stated over and over again that that is an issue for the municipality to address. That they would basically have to come up with whatever funding is necessary to ensure that those new students are educated in the same manner as every other resident in the town is. You can't deny the creation of affordable housing just because it's going to increase your school impacts.
Hi, is there any impact to our taxes with this development?
So I don't know what impact will or will not occur as a result of this development. I am here to discuss
Yeah.
Chapter 40B very generally. But I don't know specifically what impacts would or would not occur. I can tell you that
Right.
there have been studies that have been conducted, and essentially, the more bedrooms in a unit, the more likely it's going to have a negative fiscal impact. The fewer bedrooms per unit, the more likely it's going to have a positive fiscal impact.
And just one of the things, just to remind people, just want to remind people, we're going to, at this point, we're talking to Paul about the 40B, the legal 40B process, so we can have an understanding of how it works. There's no questions on Zoom. Are there any further questions of Paul? Paul, you completed your presentation?
Nope.
No,
Not yet.
Sorry.
no.
I'm jumping the
Through
gun.
the rest and then
Yeah.
go to questions.
Well, he prefers, he prefers.
If a town like Ashland is overrun with apartments, both existing and they've been okayed for development, what is 40B is, why can't we just say no to 40B? Isn't that what Milton's doing? I mean,
What?
Yeah, can you,
Let me just, I can repeat the
Yeah, we
question.
can
I can repeat his question. So the gentleman is concerned about the amount of apartments that have been built in Ashland. He's just basically asking, why can't we say no to 40B? So I think that's,
he was referring to
yeah,
He was
no,
referring to the
Right,
MBTA
but
community
let's-
zoning, which is a
right.
different discussion. So to the gentleman I know he's waiting for the microphone. Sir, so it's two different things that we're talking about, right? There's the MBTA community zoning, that's one discussion, and that is not related to this 40B discussion right now. It's a different thing that we have to discuss as a community.
And what I would state is, there have been, in the 50-plus years that Chapter 40B has been in place, dozens and dozens of local decisions that have denied comprehensive permit applications. And the municipality's success rate in having those denials upheld on appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee is very, very low. The Housing Appeals Committee was created by the legislature to be a body of an executive agency that is tasked with assisting in the creating of affordable housing. They are a developer-friendly venue by design. So if the town simply wants to say, no, we're not going to approve this 40B development or any 40B developments, very likely it's going to be appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee, and the Housing Appeals Committee is going to overturn the board's decision unless the board is able to point to a legitimate issue of local concern that supports their decision to deny. So you can't just say, we're going to deny because we have too much rental housing or too much affordable housing in town. If you're under the 10%, if you don't meet any of the safe harbors, you're subject to 40B, and any decision that you make on a comprehensive permit application is subject to appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee.
can you itemize, you said, I don't want to misquote you.
That's better. Is this on? I don't know.
Yes.
It's on. Can you give, you say unless the local appeals boards, or whatever their title is, can identify specific harms to the community?
I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to
Thank
the
you.
issues of local concern
I'd like to hear
that
them.
can support.
As I understand it, in the planning board process, normally, the developer, as they approach the board, there's a number of studies that are done, stormwater studies, traffic studies, and various other kinds of studies. I think that the applicant generally does those, and I think pays for them, and the town has an engineer that reviews them. Is that the same as this, or are we saying that the developer doesn't have to do those studies and impacts and so on?
No, we're saying that this is the same. They have to do those studies,
It is
and
the
the Board of
same.
Appeals can retain a peer review consultant to review those studies. Welcome.
Can you pass it to the back left corner? Can you pass the microphone back? Just leave it on.
Okay, good question. Does that include impact fees for impacts on sewer and water?
So if there are already established requirements regarding impact fees, then those are applicable to Chapter 40B developments. A developer can request a waiver of local fees. I have never seen a Housing Appeals Committee decision that has required a municipality to waive local fees in order to make a project economic.
Ash, why don't you get the microphone? Yeah, get the microphone.
The very first slide, you mentioned that things like the building code still apply. Would that include things like the stretch code that the town of Hyannis
Good question.
That is a very good question. So the question is whether or not the stretch code would apply. I wish I had a definitive answer for you
That is really
on that.
interesting.
I know that, I know of at least one 40B development that was looking for a waiver of the requirements of the stretch code, and that waiver request went to the State Building Code Board of Appeals, because the State Building Code Board of Appeals has the right to waive provisions of the State Building Code. It did not go to the Board of Appeals as part of the 40B application. There is an argument that could be made that since it's a local opt-in, that's a local requirement, but I have never seen a decision on that question.
Just, Paul, just to clarify, you're referring to the local opt-in, which we passed at town meeting.
Right.
And is the state stretch code without the opt-in, is that basically enforceable?
So,
And the
so if I
question
can
is
just
about-
sharpen that question just a little bit, Rob. Ashland has green community status, so we follow the stretch code. The opt-in is a separate question, not, the opt-in doesn't even apply till Jan. So the stretch code itself is the base code as far as Ashland is concerned. Would that still apply? Because that's not an opt-in code. It's by dint of us bringing a green community, that's the code that applies to Ashland.
I think the answer is still the same. I mean, the participation as a green community is a local opt-in process. If I had to guess how that question would be answered if it was ever taken to the Housing Appeals Committee, I would lean on the side of that it cannot be waived, that it's going to be determined to be part of the state provision rather than the local provision. But again, there is
Okay.
no decisional law to provide any instruction on that.
Could you just clarify what is that stretch code? There are those of us who have no.
So the stretch code is it's a local opt-in provision of the state building code that has greater energy saving components to it. And Ashland has apparently adopted the stretch code. So it's any development that moves forward in Ashland would theoretically be subject to that, rather than the minimum state building code standards applicable in municipalities that have not adopted this stretch code. All right, I think I'm going to skip this next slide because this is really Board of Appeals.
I just had to jump to a question online. Mark Dissoni, you have your hand up, so please, I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Hey, thank you, Mark Dissoni, 49 Hawthorne Road. And the opt-in stretch code and what I formulated for this town, the form-based, is working fine now. But I'm going to ask when the legislator going over these laws, going over the talk and discussion, debate, and whatever you do, why can't the State House actually see what the service is it's going to hurt if you overrun with more residents, and what would happen with the town if the citizen percentage overgrows municipal services? Can that be answered?
I guess I'm not quite clear on what the question is. Is the question, can a Board of Appeals deny a 40B development if it's going to have a negative impact on municipal services?
No, I'm saying in the State House where this is authored, okay?
Yes.
They don't see each town, bunch of municipalities and service the responders, fire, police, DPW, but they let the developers want to overbuild. Why would that be all right in the opt-in or form-based? Why is that going to be okay if you can't expand municipal services?
Paul, do you think, Michael, you want to?
Well, I think, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. So there's a concern that Mark has expressed that with these developments, it's going to basically require more in municipal services than it brings in tax revenue. And why don't people at the state level, why do they allow that to happen?
We don't know what they do with this.
That's basically it. And why do they have, and why do they let it happen? And yet, saying, oh, it's in the name of progress and for affordable housing. It won't be affordable if you bring the many people in, and then you have all this people walking and
All right, Mark, thank you. Paul, I don't know if you had anything specific you could respond to that. It's a kind of a general policy question, which, but
Yeah,
if there's, I think we
I
can,
can't say why the legislature does what it does.
yeah, so,
None of us can, so.
yeah. So, thank you, Mark. Go ahead, Paul.
All right, if there aren't, well, there is another question.
Paul, could you just articulate the difference between what's called a friendly 40B project and I guess, a non-friendly 40B? Just so people understand the benefit behind working with the developer in order to get the affordable housing count above the 10% threshold with projects that are put together versus being forced to accept projects that are, I don't know if the term is an aggressive 40B. I think that, your expertise would shed some benefit on that.
We need to have everybody identify themselves when they speak.
Well, that's probably a good idea.
Sorry, Steve Riegel-Embark, one of the architects.
Yes, great. Thank you, Steve.
So generally speaking, friendly 40B has been shorthand for local initiative project 40B development. So that is one of the options for a developer to move forward with a project eligibility letter. That actually requires local support of the development. It requires your select board to actually sign the application to the subsidizing agency. It allows your select board to be a signatory to the regulatory agreement at the end of the process. That's always been the shorthand for friendly 40B, but I don't think that that's necessarily completely accurate. You certainly can have 40B applications where an applicant is very accommodating and works with the municipality. I'll give you an example. I represented the Board of Appeals in Groveland a few years back. A developer came in with a 40B application that was actually above the large project safe harbor threshold. In representing the board, I advised them to provide a safe harbor notification to the developer. The developer, I think, had missed the fact that the large project threshold was exceeded. They immediately said, well, we're going to reduce the number of units. And the Board of Appeals said, well, we don't want you to reduce the number of units because this is going to get us over 10%. And the Board of Appeals said, we've asserted our safe harbor, but we want to work with you. And unless we identify specific issues of local concern through our review process, our intent would be to issue an approval to allow this and to get us over the 10%. That was a mass housing project, but that was a friendly 40B. You're welcome. All right, so negotiation and work sessions.
Do we have that up there?
I will tell you that Chapter 40B developments come in all shapes and sizes. That is a 40B development.
Yeah.
So negotiation with developers is possible. I think it's a rare Chapter 40B development that goes out the door from the Board of Appeals the same way it came in. The Board of Appeals is allowed to have work sessions with developers, and that can be with a member of the Board of Appeals, or it could be with local staff. I'm representing a board right now that has had, I've got to say, probably at least a dozen work sessions with the applicant's engineers, architects, the board's peer review consultants. And what it does, it helps address a lot of the technical questions that come up throughout the process that take a lot of time, in the public hearing to go through. This helps eliminate that and allows the board to actually get to questions more quickly in the public hearing, and it allows the public more time to actually provide their input, because we're not waiting for 3 hours for a developer to make a presentation on very technical issues. Neighbors can and should be invited to these work sessions. All discussions during the work session are advisory in nature. No decisions can be made. So you can't be where a developer comes in and says, all right, we're going to agree to reduce this project by 20%. The board can say, well, that's wonderful. You know, present that as a plan at a public hearing. We can't tell you yes or no as part of a work session. And again, these have to comply with the open meeting law. So depending on the number of board members, that will limit the number of participants from the board. So if you have a 3-person board, you can only have 1 person participate because you can't have a quorum without violating the open meeting law. I always recommend you don't have more than 1 person anyways, because I think it makes a bad look and has the potential to result in serial communications, which could still wind up an open meeting law violation. Next slide. So this goes to the questions that the Board of Appeals is going to need to address during the local process. And what they need to do is balance the regional affordable housing need with issues of local concern. And the issues of local concern are health, safety, environmental, design, open space, planning, or other local concerns. I can give you some examples of local concerns that have been successful in upholding local denials, certain traffic safety decisions where you've got a very, very long dead-end road and you've got reverse curves on the roadway coming in. That has led to a denial being upheld. On the other hand, long dead-end road alone hasn't been enough to have a decision upheld, a denial upheld. Yes.
Tricia Kendall, 6 Reuben-Ecker Road. Just on that list, what does the planning component mean? I understand I think the other ones, but why is planning on that list? What does that mean?
So there are circumstances in which local planning concerns have been sufficient to uphold a denial. There was one from down the Cape. I think it was Barnstable, but I'm not 100% sure now, where they had an area in their downtown area that was specifically identified for a particular type of development. Developer came in, was looking to do a 40B, and the town was able to show that there was a very legitimate local concern with regards to the type of development that they wanted there, and that the town had been progressing, had a plan for the development of affordable housing and was making progress on complying with that plan. So there are certain circumstances, again, where planning concerns have been upheld. Again, there are also circumstances where planning concerns have been raised and have been found to be insufficient. So it's very, very fact-specific. The Housing Appeals Committee has a 3-part test that it implements to determine whether a particular planning concern is legitimate. And then if it is legitimate, then they have to balance it against the regional need for affordable housing. Next slide. Holding deliberation sessions, I believe I touched on this already. So once the public hearing is closed, no more input can be taken by the board. The board has to deliberate in public. So what you'll do is you'll just schedule a deliberation session. It will review, most likely, a draft decision as part of that deliberation session. And it also review the requested waivers. I will say, this is not a requirement. A Board of Appeals can actually review a draft decision and essentially deliberate while the public hearing is still open, presuming that you're within the 180-day period as potentially extended. I find that to be the better approach because that allows you to receive input from the developer so that if the board is proposing conditions that may render the project uneconomic, they get the feedback from the developer to let them know. It also allows the public the ability to comment on the proposed conditions so that the board gets that feedback as well. Okay. Drafting and issuing the comprehensive permit decision. The Board of Appeals has 3 decision alternatives: denial, approval as submitted, and I literally have never seen a project approved as submitted, or approval with conditions. Next slide. So approval with conditions. The conditions should not make the project uneconomic. The conditions and/or requirements must be consistent with local needs. And there's a provision in the regulations that states the board may not reduce the number of units for reasons other than evidence of local concerns within the board's purview. Again, so that gets back to that list of issues of local concern that can support a board's either denial or imposition of conditions that render a project uneconomic. This is saying that even if you're not rendering the project uneconomic, you can't just arbitrarily reduce the number of units. You've got to have a legitimate issue of local concern that supports that reduction.
Paul, real quick. So issues of like local concerns. What kind of bar is set for that? Like what kind of bar does the municipality have to meet to basically show that? And if you don't mind when you answer, if you could answer out to the audience because the microphone doesn't pick it up.
Yep. I can say it's a high bar. Again, the Housing Appeals Committee is a forum that is designed to facilitate the creation of affordable housing. The number of decisions by the Housing Appeals Committee upholding a denial are very, very small. The vast majority, more than 90%, probably more than 95% of appeals, of denials, result in a decision in favor of the developer, presuming they get to that point. A fair amount of appeals get resolved prior to a decision. The applicant and the board can agree to mediate. That mediation can result in changes to an application, a remand back to the board, and the board can issue a decision that is consistent with what the mediation process resulted in. Jeff?
Thank you. For the record, Jeff Engler. I had a slightly, I could be off base interpretation of Michael's question. I think you're speaking of local concerns that the town used to deny a permit. I have lots of comprehensive permits that have 70, 80, 90, 100 local concerns that are identified in the permit that are acceptable to we as the developer that we adhere to. Mm-hmm. So it's not a zero sum, it's a local concern that we're going to apply and it's going to force that developer to deny. No, it's lots of things. These are concerns of Board of Health, of the building department, of engineering that are reasonable and make their way into a decision that's acceptable to we as the developer. So there's different kind of criteria relative to a local concern that's kind of a deal crusher and forces the developer to appeal, as opposed to local concerns that make their way into the permit that are reasonable and not ridiculously financially penal, that just are, collaborative process. So thank you.
And if I can expand on that, there is a benefit to a board to approve a decision with conditions as opposed to denial. And this is a trend in recent Housing Appeals Committee decisions, even when there are 80, 100 conditions and an applicant appeals 60 of them. Only the conditions that the applicant appeals are being stricken. So all of the remaining conditions are being left in place. I will tell you that when the Housing Appeals Committee issues a decision on a denial, they have a standard set of conditions, and it's like 6 or 7 conditions, and that's it. So there's a benefit to a board, even if all of its more stringent conditions get eliminated because they render the project uneconomic. A number of base level conditions would still be there. Also, with regards to conditions that a board can or cannot impose, I will say that generally speaking, applicants are willing to accept conditions that may actually go beyond the authority of a board to impose. So there's a decision that I was involved in from Amesbury back in 2010. Zoning Board of Appeals of Amesbury versus Housing Appeals Committee. That decision lays out exactly what the role of a Board of Appeals is in a comprehensive permit application. And that states that the Board of Appeals is stepping into the shoes of all other local boards. And that is the limit of the Board of Appeals jurisdiction on a comprehensive permit application. So if you don't have a local rule or requirement that was generally imposed by a different local board, the Board of Appeals can't just step up and impose that as condition. That being said, it's not at all uncommon for boards to issue decisions with conditions that overreach a little bit. And as long as the entirety of the decision is not so objectionable that the applicant feels a right to appeal, they'll accept those conditions. So again, there is a substantial benefit to a board to issue a decision with conditions rather than to just simply outright deny an approval. You would really need to be able to strongly identify a significant issue of local concern with support from the decades of decisional law at the Housing Appeals Committee that says this is something that you can deny an application on. Absent that, it's a much better strategy to approve with conditions. Appeal of decision. So appeals by the applicant, we've gone over this now ad nauseum, are made to the Housing Appeals Committee. That's a developer-friendly forum by design. Appeals for aggrieved parties other than the developer go to the Superior Court or to the Land Court. It's an interesting scenario when you've got those dual appeals, when you've got a permit that's been appealed by the developer to the Housing Appeals Committee, but also by a group of abutters to the Land Court or the Superior Court. Probably about 10 or 15 years ago, the Supreme Judicial Court actually resolved the contradiction in the statute and determined that the abutter appeal will automatically be stayed in the Superior Court or Land Court until the Housing Appeals Committee process has been completed. And essentially, once the Housing Appeals Committee process has been completed, it's more likely than not going to result in a change to the decision that was originally issued, and that's going to render the other appeal moot, and it will just be dismissed. And then any appeal of the Housing Appeals Committee decision would have to be taken. So, and this is something that's more of interest to the Board of Appeals than perhaps the general public, but once they issue a comprehensive permit, they're not done with the process. So managing the comprehensive permit, there are regulatory agreements, deed riders, monitoring agreements that have to be executed by the developer and the subsidizing agency. And that is all done as part of the final approval process with the subsidizing agency. Any decision that the board issues should have a condition that prevents the commencement of construction until final approval by the subsidizing agency has been issued. The applicant is going to be required to do a lottery plan and an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. They're going to have to provide information regarding the income, asset, and first-time buyer status for the affordable units. Pursuant to the comprehensive permit regulations, a comprehensive permit will lapse after 3 years unless the board provides a longer period, which I've never seen happen. But that can be extended by request of the applicant, and that extension is by regulation determined to be insubstantial. Transfer of the comprehensive permit. It used to be the Board of Appeals had a role in the process of the transfer of the comprehensive permit. Now they're only entitled to notification. Subsidizing agency has the exclusive jurisdiction over the transfer of the comprehensive permit. And then inspections during construction, and that would be something that would be addressed as part of the board's comprehensive permit decision as to who does those inspections during the construction process. So that's the end of the presentation. Happy to take any additional questions.
Question on the, question. Larry DeYoung, 106 Sudbury Road. During the construction process, in the order of conditions, if a developer crosses the line of the condition and does something he shouldn't, how is that resolved?
So that is within the jurisdiction of the building commissioner. It's the same as a violation of any permit. Subdivision approval, special permit approval, if they're not in compliance with the permit that is issued, that's a zoning violation. It's enforced by your zoning enforcement officer, which is the building commission.
And is it, sometimes it's a question of a fine, or sometimes a question of doing it the way they're supposed to?
It could be either.
Go either way.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, you had a question?
Indeed, I don't know if you can offer yours.
Hold on and get the microphone, please. Thank you. Get the microphone. Thank you.
I'm not sure if you can offer any insight or experience to surrounding towns dealing with these types of applications, such as Southborough, Sherborne, and some of these other quote-unquote exclusive types of communities. How do they deal with these? Because from my experience, when I look at those communities, they're not having these developers come in.
So Sherborne definitely is having these developers come in because I represent several of them. I have one developer in Sherborne that has one project that was just appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee, has 2 other projects pending, and 2 other projects on their way. I've also represented multiple other developers in Sherborne. Southborough, I think, is over 10% now?
Yes.
I believe so, yeah.
But, you know, they've had their share of applications too. I actually represented, and I very, very infrequently do this, but I represented an abutter to a 40B development in Southborough, and we had one of the very few decisions ever that overturned a local decision under 40B.
And a follow-up to that question is, if we hit the 10%, and that I would imagine is the majority of the developer's approach, but if this particular developer hits that 10% threshold, are we done?
So the answer to that question is both yes and no. So first of all, the way that the regulations work, comprehensive permit development is countable on your subsidized housing inventory as soon as the decision is filed with the town clerk's office, okay? However, that permit comes off, all those units come off of your SHI if a building permit is not pulled within 1 year of the issuance of decision. So then you're open again. And then once a building permit is issued, the units come back on.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Second thing is, every 10 years, a new census comes out, your total number of year-round housing units goes up. Theoretically, if you are just over the 10%, you could fall back below it again. And finally, there was a time when developments were not required to be affordable in perpetuity. So there are a number of developments out there that potentially have expiring use restrictions. So if you have any of those on your subsidized housing inventory and they expire, theoretically, you could drop back below the 10%.
Excuse me, Town Planner Peter Metzger. We have one hand up online under iPhone. I am going to ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Be careful.
And identify yourself.
They can't turn on video.
Thank you. So I'm interested to know what towns have stopped 40B in their community and what was the reasons or the waivers for that?
Can you please introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Sure, this is Amy.
Okay, Amy.
Hey, Amy.
Hey.
So, Paul, maybe a brief summation of how.
So the question was, what towns have stopped 40B? And the answer to that question is no towns have stopped 40B. There have been towns that have been successful in denying specific 40B applications. Those are very dependent on issues relating to the site. And there can be a number of different reasons. You know, there can be an identified health or safety reason. There could be a planning reason that supports the denial. There could also be an issue with regards to site control. There was a decision from the Housing Appeals Committee that got overturned in Groton more than 10 years ago at this point, which basically the Housing Appeals Committee issued a decision requiring developer to be allowed to clear branches that were obstructing sight distance from their project entrance on municipally owned property. And the Superior Court, which was upheld by the appeals court, determined that the only town meeting had the right to basically grant an easement, in this case it would be a view easement, to a party. That was not something that could be done through the Chapter 40B process, and that decision was overturned. So there are a number of different ways in which 40B projects have been successfully denied, but the ones that have been denied and overturned greatly outnumber the ones that have been successfully denied. Yes?
As an example,
Milton has.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Faith Roby, 12 Fern Crossing, Ashland.
Milton.
Oh, no, Milton. So the people in Milton voted against the 40B that they were supposed to get,
No,
correct?
I think we're talking about the MBTA communities.
3A.
Was that a whole different thing?
Completely different thing, yes.
Yeah, maybe I could explain a little bit. So yes, they're two completely different things. So 40B is a law that has been on the books since 1969, and it essentially allows developers to seek and receive waivers from existing zoning, a municipality's existing zoning, in order to do projects. So the MBTA communities law is more recent. It's been within the last 2 years. And what that requires communities to do is zone to allow dense residential as of right. So, one basically requires a community to zone a certain way, and then 40B is a way to basically circumvent existing zoning. I hope that makes sense.
And we are also subject to MBTA law as well. So that's the confusion, I think. There's been a lot of discussion in the community about the MBTA zoning law, so.
And the legitimacy of Chapter 40B has been established since 1973 by the Supreme Judicial Court in the case of Hanover versus Housing Appeals Committee.
Hey, yeah.
All right, does that wrap up any questions? I guess not. Okay. Sorry.
So in effect, what I heard was that as a town, we would be in a better place to look at the merits of each application because we have to meet a certain limit, and then really work with the developer to try and get as many of those accommodations as we can that are in the interest of the town, rather than just trying to fight this thing, because if it's not this project, it'll be another project that you would effectively still have to meet the 40B law. It's not like you can fight the 40B law. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. So what I would say is, presuming this does eventually go to an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Zoning Board of Appeals should review the project. It should identify the issues of local concern that they believe are in place. They should work with the developer to try to address those issues of local concern. They should issue a decision that does address those issues of local concern. And hopefully that means that you've got a decision that puts you over your 10% and you don't have to accept any more 40B developments. Well, as long as you remain over the 10%, there's no fixed time there. I said, if you get up to 11% or 12%, you're not going to fall back down below 10% on the next decennial census. So, that's going to leave you over 10% for quite a long time.
I think in all due respect, the problem with getting to 10 or 12% with what we're looking at right now is the implications for what it does to this community.
That is correct. That's what.
Yeah.
That is more of a concern, for you as a select board, really, than it is for the Board of Appeals. That's a little bit beyond their purview in reviewing a 40B application. Certainly is, something that you should consider and identify when you're making your response to the subsidizing agency. Correct.
And Paul, I think my question was kind of off of your point, which is it seems like your presentation is excellent for the Zoning Board of Appeals, but there's this whole element of this that happens before we even get there, which is the negotiation with the developer. And it sounds like the developer in the room asked a question or made a point earlier, the gentleman in 2 seats in front of me, that, hey, there are ways to work with the developer during this phase that can work well for everyone. This can essentially be like a friendly 40B where you focus on those unique elements for this particular project. It's smack in the middle of downtown. It's got this prominence, it has a rich history, it's got environmental concerns, it's got planning elements. As a planning board member, not speaking on behalf of the planning board, there are key elements to this project that are very much tied to our planning as a community. So I really appreciate your presentation. I did want to kind of comment that it seems like there's a big component here, which is sort of an opportunity to work actively with the developer during this phase before we even get to your presentation.
And that is accurate. You do have the ability to work with the developer to shape the project before anything is filed. However, you also have the ability to work with the applicant after a comprehensive permit application is filed. As I noted earlier, I have not seen an application go out the door the way it came in terms of when it was filed with the Board of Appeals and when the Board of Appeals issues its decision. So, that is a process that can occur at any point, even after the Board of Appeals issues its decision, because again, there could be a mediation that has additional compromise.
Can you comment on the successful elements that we would need as a community for that negotiations to be useful or successful at this phase right now?
So it's not all that common to have this negotiation before an application is filed with the Board of Appeals unless it is proceeding as a LIP development, in which case that's a much more active role for the Select Board in shaping what is submitted with the subsidizing agency.
Can you please explain a LIP?
LIP is one of the methods in which an applicant can seek to obtain a project eligibility letter. It's a local initiative project.
Thank you.
And a reason a developer would go forward with a LIP application is because the regulatory hurdles are a little lower. They're not required to go through a subsidizing agency for the financing. They're able to just finance it on their own. And essentially what the subsidy is in that circumstance is the technical assistance that they would receive from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities.
Okay. Is that it, Paul, or anything?
That's it for my presentation.
Yeah, and I just want to say, thank you for that presentation. Went a little over what we had planned. Next time an attorney tells me he has a half an hour presentation, I will remember this.
I didn't say how much we had for questions.
There was, yes. There you are, getting that. That's a good comment. Yes, it's a very useful discussion, and I think we got out a lot of good issues that can answer a lot of questions. So certainly thank you for that. Anything else you want to add at the end here? Dare I say?
Good luck with your process.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
And I just do, and how's everybody holding up out there? Because we are a bit over time. Ash is good. Okay, that's good. We do have, thank you, Paul. As I said before, we have a presentation from Michael Herbert, the town manager, to kind of summarize the comments we've received so far, maybe review the portal and the process, and then Jeff Engler, who did ask a question earlier, will also be making a presentation on the project, and he's brought his development team. So we do have a few more things to get through before we go to the general public comment period. So please bear with us. We're probably, I would say, an hour over time at this point. So, but is everybody holding up all right? Is this a useful discussion? We're interested in continuing? Yes, Joel?
Question. Will we have sufficient time to express ourselves? I thought that was the main purpose of this meeting.
That's my intention. We may need to set time limits on points in line with what I said earlier. We'll ask for who intends to make a statement and then set some time periods. We're talking, a maximum of 2 or 3 minutes apiece. So, and I will remind people that we have a whole portal set up where you can write at length your points, and those will go to mass housing as part of this process. So, go ahead, Michael.
Can I make a question, I guess?
Yes, what, briefly.
First of all, the presentation was incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
I don't care about the length of it. It seemed much more appropriate to me. The public could have been welcome, but it should have been a focus on the Board of Appeals and the mechanics of the process. I think many of us came here to express ourselves. I thought that was the primary purpose. And we've gotten way off topic here. And I just
Well, I would-
think it's
okay.
unfortunate that there wasn't more time provided over the last few weeks. I know there were many other issues. And I think it's very unfortunate that, I mean, I wrote up a presentation. It doesn't fit in 2 or 3 minutes. And
That's
so-
surprising, Joel, coming from you.
I appreciate the humor, but I'm going to read the first 3
Joel,
Okay.
Joel, another thing is, I just want to explain, like, what we're doing is highly unusual for this process. This project has not even been issued a site eligibility letter. And so basically what that means is the developer submits an application to the subsidizing agency, which is Mass Housing. Mass Housing in turn notifies us and gives us an opportunity to provide the select board to provide a comment letter. And typically what happens is that the select board basically distributes the application out to boards and committees for them to provide comment. What we've done is we've taken an extra step and basically put some of this material out to the public and given the public an opportunity to provide comment at this stage. But really my main point is that you're going to have a whole zoning board of appeals hearing process in order to make public comment and let your concerns be known and basically address the issues that you see and that you have. So really, we were hoping that this forum was a good opportunity to educate, because there's a lot of misconceptions about 40B. 40B is a very complex topic. Paul probably scratched the surface of what, do we even get into housing production plans and things like that? Yeah, there's so many elements of this. So I just want to reiterate to everybody that there is going to be a whole public hearing process with the ZBA that will allow people to make comments. So, all right. So that being said, it actually segues into what I wanted to cover. I had mentioned just a little bit earlier that we have put the materials out to the public and allowed the public to provide comment and express their concerns, mainly through a comment form, which again we're going to take. And what we have done is basically taken those comments and tried to categorize them in buckets. But then, and we will submit that to Mass Housing. But we're also going to submit those comments as is, so to basically let those go through. So, excuse me, just 1 minute. So just this graph I think is probably a little bit hard to read, but basically what it expresses is on the lower axes the number of times a concern was mentioned, and on the left. It lists what those concerns are. So, I won't go through each of the individual numbers, but I can tell you what I'll do is just kind of go through what these are from most mentioned to least mentioned. So, the first concern that was expressed is, an increase in traffic. Having 250 units and basically the corresponding number of cars into downtown is a concern. School capacity has also been mentioned as a concern, and understandably so. Capacity of infrastructure, like our water and sewer, was third most mentioned. The next one it's kind of hard to codify, but it's basically changing the feel of the community, changing the small town feel, and concerns about that. And then next is doesn't fit the character of our community. Concerns about that. Moving on, the next concern was that it was too tall. Jeff will get into this, but at its highest, this is a 5-story building as viewed from the street. Next is a concern about increase in crime and noise, like quality of life issues like that. The next is basically needing more commercial space. So I think this has 15,000 square feet of commercial space, if I remember. 18. All right, I was off by 3. You know, and compared to the amount of residential units, essentially that ratio. There's also concern expressed about our public safety departments and their ability to handle this this increase in people. Additionally, you know, do we have the equipment that is going to be able to basically protect, you know, a 5 or 6-story building if you're looking at it from the bottom. Next was an increase in tax burden. Now, this was interesting in kind of going through the comments. I think there's some people that believe that because these are apartments, they don't pay taxes, which is not the case. So the owner of the property actually pays taxes, and assuming, you know, basically the rent that is paid helps pay for that. So they do pay taxes. What a more accurate concern is do those taxes that you're bringing in offset the cost of services? Next would be, you know, worried about preserving historical buildings. I mean, currently there are 2, you know, granite buildings that I believe were built in the 1860s. Joan? Yeah, Joan's nodding yes, so we'll keep it at the decade, Joan. The 3rd granite building was actually rebuilt, I think, in the 19-teens or 20s, actually from stone that was there previously. Not enough parking, and I think specifically not enough parking within the development. There were concerns expressed about a transient population and, you know, the people that apartments bring into town. There was worry about environmental impacts, specifically concerns around the impacts of the Nyanza plume. There were some concerns about adding more affordable units and what that means for the town. And there was concern, at the bottom, there was concern expressed about the current businesses at the mill. So those were the comments that we have received so far as of, I think, this morning, right, JB? Yeah, as of this morning. So if there was anything in the afternoon, we didn't catch those. So some additional concerns and more specific concerns that we have received so far from boards and committees and staff. Stormwater concerns, and this is in no particular order. You know, we have a high water table downtown, and you know, basically, is there going to be enough room to basically accommodate an effective stormwater system, given where the groundwater is? Regulations regarding the riverfront area. I mean, this is within, you know. I know at least 100 feet of the Sudbury River. There are environmental concerns, including, you know, well, namely, I think everybody, you know, who knows about Nyanza has concerns about the plume that runs underneath the property, as well they should. But there are also other chemical concerns there, you know, chemical spills or something that happened there that, that we're also concerned about. Sewer capacity, both as it relates to the physical infrastructure. Like, for example, we only have an 8-inch sewer main at that location. It does transition at some point to a 12-inch. You know, our pumping stations, can they handle the additional capacity? But then we also have limits imposed upon us by Mass DEP in terms of how much we can transport. And then we also have an intermunicipal agreement, that's what an IMA is, with Framingham that also has limitations on it as well. Parking, just a little bit more specifically, you know, enough parking on site. I can tell you that we have some direct experience now that some of these projects have been built, where we have seen the parking kind of spread from the development to on-street parking and public lots. Next would be, traffic and, configuration of the traffic flow, especially looking at where the entrances and exits are in relation to the light with Pleasant Street. Engineering has specifically identified the Mill Pond Bridge and its condition and its ability to handle more traffic. And then also for us, the height of the building and the architecture and scale are concerns. So that's really just kind of a high-level summary of what we have so far. This comment form is still up, and it will be up. I believe we originally said until tomorrow. We're going to extend that to Friday, May 10th. So if you haven't had an opportunity to provide comment, I would encourage you to do it through that form.
Is that link on the town website?
It is. So, so there's a section of the town website that has some of like the site plan, the architectural renderings, and that's where you can find the form as well.
It's also under news in the main, if you go through the news.
Yeah, but I believe that might be broken now. I think we have to check. So if it is, we'll fix it, but
okay.
It should be that.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's about it. I don't, yes, Anna.
A quick question. The prior slide with all the
Mm-hmm.
on it, in thinking about it, especially, was it Paul, the attorney, his presentation, I think he relied upon the Cape Cod example where there was a successful denial of an application to answer Trish's question about what is the planning element that is really important. And in defining that, he talked about things like planning in the community, character, things like that. And so looking at the first slide, it seems like the height of the buildings, the character, the small town feel, the historic, all relate to that planning element. And if you actually put them together, they are the top concern on this particular sheet. And it seems like it might be worthwhile for the select board to consider editing this to include that planning element right on top.
Yeah.
Because it's so key to successful denials of the application and could be useful in negotiations as well.
Yeah, so this, we could certainly categorize it in different ways. And by the way, this is just from the public. So they didn't have the opportunity to hear Paul's presentation before submitting this. So, and it's interesting, Anna, when they talk about planning, what does that mean? Does it talk about some of the things that you're talking about? Is it talking about consistency with maybe a town's master plan or comprehensive plan, or consistency with the zoning that currently exists in place? I don't know those answers, so it would, that's certainly something to explore. So, I was going to keep it as brief as I can keep things brief as much as possible. But yeah, just wanted to give a summary of that. And the reason we did this before the developer and Jeff gave his presentation is this is going to give him an opportunity to, as he's doing his presentation, perhaps address some of those concerns. So,
Sounds good. I think thank you, Michael. So Jeff, if you're ready to come up and present just a summary of the proposed development and any comments you'd care to make about the questions that have come up, feel free.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and
speak into the microphone. There you go.
Mr. Chairman, and for members of the public, for the record, my name is Jeff Engler. I'm from the development team from Strategic Land Ventures. We brought a whole presentation tonight, but in terms of understanding where we are in the time and reading the room, putting it to the board and the people in the audience, if it's more, we can answer a lot of the questions that have been raised, but if it's more productive to have people express their concerns, and I think this gentleman indicated that that's why he's here tonight.
Sure.
We're happy to
get a sense of the
entertain
board
that.
here.
Well, part of me is, we don't know all the details, so I personally would like to see what you're presenting. Obviously, some of these are concerns that no matter what you decide to do, they're going to be there, but let's see what you have to offer, and then we can go from there.
Fair enough.
And, I think be mindful of the time, I think.
I'm I'm going to fly through
Thank
this.
you.
So for the record, Jeff Engler. I'm joined tonight by Matt Merva from Bowler, who's our landscape architect, George Campbell from Campbell Environmental, who's our LSP, Bill Messinger, and Steve Regal from Embark, who are our architectural team. So we're appreciative of the time that's given to us tonight. I want to re-emphasize what we're doing tonight is a little bit unusual, and it's a credit to this board in terms of we're having a public meeting very early in the process. We don't even have a site letter from Mass Housing at this point in time. We just filed about 4 weeks ago. But we did have several meetings with the town prior to filing, trying to get some input on the general project, some of the key concerns of the municipality, some of which have been incorporated in the plan that we've submitted to Mass Housing and that you'll see tonight. I want to emphasize a couple things just off the cuff based on what we heard. The door to have meaningful collaboration and discussion never shuts off. Could happen next week, could happen in a month, could happen during the public hearing process. That can go on at any point. The way I describe it is we're a train going down the tracks, but doesn't mean we can't take a detour or go in a slightly different direction. With that said, we have an objective. We're really psyched about our plan and the proposal, but we recognize that everybody might not feel that way, and we're certainly open to have some meaningful discussion in some of the key elements. I also want to emphasize a few other things. One, there's a lot of discussion about, well, what are the local concerns? Where can we kind of, what are the vulnerabilities of this project? And I'm not saying this project is perfect. I'm not. What I am saying is our team is outstanding. What I am saying is we've done a lot of these projects. What I am saying is I've permitted over 5,000 units of affordable housing under 40B. And even before any discussion we had with the town, we go through the project in its entirety to look for issues that could come up during the public hearing process so that we can address them and have answers to them. That's not to say we know all the answers tonight. We don't. But generally on the fail-safe issues that may quote-unquote trip up a project, I can stand before you tonight and say with a high degree of confidence, we're confident that we can satisfy all the state requirements under 40B. So I think that's an important understanding to say this is not our first rodeo. With that said, we've been very happy to have discussions with the town. We'll continue to do so. I've done friendly 40Bs that were very unfriendly, and I've done conventional 40Bs that were very collaborative and very community was involved and ended up really successfully. So I wouldn't get too hung up on this nomenclature or description of friendly or unfriendly, because it can go in any number of ways based on input and we hear and what's important. I can also say, and then I'll fly quickly, the issues that were raised tonight in terms of what the community concerns are, not one of those issues is something that we haven't seen before in one way, shape, or form on virtually every project. All right, one of the things that we like about this particular opportunity, very different than a lot of our projects, there's something already there. The site is fully disturbed. People talk about environmental concerns and stormwater. What we're going to be doing is exponentially better than what is going on right now, what is flowing into the ground, how stormwater is being treated, environmental considerations. There's no treatment of anything going in the ground right now, any of the civil engineering, environmental considerations. So we like when sites are totally paved, like this site is, at least the development area, as opposed to going into pristine woods that are untouched and we're doing clearings and bringing in all sorts of different things. So that's one of the reasons, and we also obviously love the location. We think it can be a real catalyst and stimulation of downtown, commercial, retail, residential. It's close to the mass transit location. So when the state is evaluating the site, there's lots of things that the state likes. And then lastly, and then I'll kind of fly through, oh, by the way, anybody that reads articles knows that Eastern Massachusetts in particular is in a housing crisis. And it's not a crisis in Framingham, it's not a crisis in Ashland, it's not a crisis in Southborough, not a crisis in Newton. It is a crisis in the entire eastern Massachusetts, which is why it has such an emphasis on the state legislature, the governor, and all sorts of things. There are major mandates coming to build more housing. So the concerns that are raised tonight, if that was how, and that has been how municipalities have governed real estate development, which in my opinion is why the state is in the situation it's in right now, is because nobody wants to have, why should our town be responsible for development? Everybody thinks that for the most part. So with that said, let me fly through this really quickly. Once again, we're Strategic Land Ventures. We've done, and I'm just going to fly through. Oh, you're in control of it? All right, I'll tell you. I'll tell you when to flip. So we've done. I've been in business in multifamily residential mixed income development for about 20 years. We started Strategic Land Ventures with my partner Justin Krebs about 5 years ago. And since that time, we've done a bunch of projects, which we'll share with you tonight. Project in Situate, 2 projects in Winchester that are recently opened, a project in Framingham that included a renovation of a historic mill. Next slide. A couple other projects, one right on the Brook line, Alston line, a project in Bridgewater, which is not quite analogous to what we're doing because that's really more student housing. It's pretty much right on the Bridgewater State campus and designed more for students. And then there's a project in Medway that we did in combination with Toll Residential. They actually completed the build-out. Next slide, please. We just recently were approved on a friendly 40B in downtown Walpole, a 142 unit project, and that is 6 levels as well. Next slide. This is a project in Manchester by the Sea. In all candor, I've been involved in, 140 Bs. It's the most contentious project I've ever been involved with, and it's currently under appeal. We spent a year trying to do something friendly with the town, and I won't go into details, but we're at the HAC right now, and I have every confidence that we're going to be successful. But that town, in its infinite wisdom, did deny the project, not an approval with conditions. So we've been through the testimony in that project, and by the time we file here in Ashland, God willing, if we get a site letter, that may have been adjudicated or not. But we're very excited about that. Another phase 2 project to the other Framingham project that the town liked the first phase so much they encouraged a second phase. Next slide. Next slide, Peter. And then one of the things I think in this slide is a little bit, you skipped over, but it doesn't matter. We pride ourselves on doing nice communities. I mean, we've done projects in Situate, a couple in Winchester, one in downtown Walpole we're going to be doing. We do nice quality, high-end finishes. We do nice community spaces for the residents. One of the key components to this project, which is very unique to any 40B I have ever been involved with, and is a credit to some of the folks sitting up at this table, is we have a commercial component to this project, and we have a large area, which we'll show you on the site, that is for the greater Ashland community benefit, not for our residents exclusively. It is on our land, private property, but as you'll see, it's designed for the community in its entirety for a whole bunch of outdoor uses. So this project, more than any of 40B, all the ones we've showed, ones I've permitted for other developers, this has a pretty sizable community component, commercial component, both inside the building as well as outside the building. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, who's going to walk through the preliminary design. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. And then the one other thing I wanted to mention, and Mr. Haverty, Councillor Haverty mentioned this, and I took some, read between the lines a little bit in the article that was recently written in the local paper, kind of like this is a fait accompli, the design, we don't have any input, this is what it's going to look like at the end of the day. I would say with all clarity and sincerity, that's not true. If there's input, if there's things about the design, I mean, I'm not talking like globally different, but if there's something about the fenestration or the materials or the color or the design or some of those, we want to listen. As Councillor Haverty said, I've never been involved with the project that, when it was permitted, looked exactly like what we submitted. So there's opportunity to have comment, there's opportunity to have input, and we take that very seriously. Our team is excellent, outstanding at what they do, and we listen very closely. That doesn't mean we can do everything or will do everything, but when there's good ideas that we can incorporate, it's our objective to listen and to try to be the best community partner we can be. So with that said, if there's no other questions for me right now, we'll turn it over. We'll get into a little bit of the design, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Jeff, and to the board. Appreciate the time, and to everyone here. I'm Bill Mensinger with Embark. We're the architects on the job. I'm here with Steve Riegel as well. I'm looking to you to, I'm going to fly through a couple of the early site contextual slides. Most of you, I think, are familiar with where the site is, but this just outlines the red line of the site context, and it shows the existing building on the site that flanks along Main Street. Next slide. And this slide also just takes an axonometric view, and it has a few blue little triangles, and those are actually the existing shots of the site that we're going to look at. Next slide. So this is just one site shot from looking east. You can see at the mill building and the existing tower there. So this is a nice shot that will be very visible for people coming from the north. And the second is the site sort of standing right in front of the two mill buildings, looking northeast on the two existing. Yep. And then a similar shot, just looking a little bit more on the north angle. You can see the two buildings here. These are the two that this project is proposing to keep and restore. Next slide. And then once again, just looking northeast, the opposite way, just at the two buildings that we're looking to maintain. Next slide. So here's just a nice little diagram. We always, in the beginning of our design process, take a step back and look at some of the site context and some of the advantages to the project. And here, as Jeff mentioned, the site really has a number of advantages. One being just a beautiful site next to the water. So the views off to the mill pond, what an opportunity for any project. We have a very nice little outcropping of the river, Sudbury River, running through off to the east, which is a nice feature that dumps into the pond. And then there's also a nice wooded fringe for privacy off to the east and to the south. So that really kind of frames a beautiful site. And then just the way that the large, 4-acre kind of open parking lot and existing building spot sits, that's gets great daylighting. That orange yellow moon-shaped symbol there is sort of the sun path rising in the east, making its way around to clockwise to the west. So the project is going to get 3/4 of the facade is going to get a significant amount of daylighting, which is a great feature. Next slide, please. So here's the first floor plan, and I just wanted to just talk quickly about how we, how the building came about. So really, starting on the left side of the building, you can see the two existing buildings. One is right here. This is the northernmost mill, and that's right now being proposed to be restored and fit out completely with a commercial retail public component. And then their abutting mill building. Okay. So the two on the left that have the yellow tone are the two existing mill buildings, and they're both being fit out. That's a combination of about 18,000 square feet of public benefit to the project. Interior space, not including some of this exterior, around 7,500 to 8,000 feet to the far north of this public plaza benefit that sort of flanks right across from the mill pond. There's tremendous opportunity, as we see it as architects, to give back to the town and to really sculpt this program with Jeff. And it could just be something that really energizes and activates this project, especially as a gateway opportunity. Oh, let me see. Yeah, that's great. So there's a nice gateway opportunity here as you come in from the north. So this is the existing building. We're going to shell that, restore it. Here, we're going to shell and restore this piece. A nice opportunity for a community-engaged program here. And then we strategically create a very large 150-foot opening on the site. This does a couple things. One, it sets the massing of the building, the taller part of the building, back over 100 feet off of the sidewalk of Main Street. That allows for daylighting to flood into the site. It keeps the height of the building away from Main Street. Number two, it creates an excellent and safe and convenient opportunity for an arrival point and then an exit point, complete with drop-off parking, short-term parking, deliveries, packages, and parking for this community and leasing office space. So that's great to get off of the street, to get in. It's a great place to pick up Ubers. And then right in the central of the plan, this is our main entrance right here. So main entrance, you're immediately, the whole building opens up and really sets itself back. You have a large 6,000 square foot amenity space that's flanked on both sides by outdoor amenity space and then double loaded corridor. The reason why the building is shaped like this is really a two-part strategy here. One is that the building presents itself never holistically. So as you drive by, you never see the whole thing. It keeps the massing of that building significantly down since it cuts around. It also is strategic with the site. It tries to keep the existing circulation and the parking around as it exists today with the main parking lot entrance in the back. So surface parking around the back here and then the covered parking underneath. 80% almost of the building's parking is concealed from view. Passerbys on Main Street won't even see it, which is a nice advantage to this project. So again,
how much parking is there?
So the total parking is 300 parking spaces. It's 250 units, but that 390 parking is considered a 1-to-1 bedroom ratio on the project, as well as an additional 50 spaces for retail that are kind of flex spaces that could also be used by residents on the off hours.
In that drop-off area in the front with the temporary parking, how many spaces is that?
That's about 15 to 8, 24, 20-ish.
Does that include handicap parking spaces?
That does include handicap spaces, and there are also some in the garage as well. Mm-hmm.
Bill, if I could also just point out, if you look in front of the existing historic buildings, we have, in this scheme, we have removed all of that asphalt parking in front of the building. Very inefficient, very dangerous, so in this scheme, because we had to pull in, we're now able to make that all green space. We're able to have a much safer access along Main Street. And then Bill, if you could also point out the townhome entries.
Yep.
And how those address.
Yeah, I'm going to get to those, right?
Summarize the comments. People won't be able to hear that from the
Sorry, they can't hear, just summarize the comment.
Yeah, so the comment was that we, as an added benefit, the existing condition right here has a very close parking lot pull-in right along the street here. We've since filled that in with green space to give a nice front yard relief and to really beautify this whole corner. And in turn, we moved the parking lot to the right here to create a get off the street, have a good relief off the street and get in and out safely. Safety is a primary concern for building drop-off and for short-term visitors.
Where does that dump onto Main Street, that little front area?
Right here?
Yeah.
Well, Pleasant Street intersection's about right here, so.
So is it straight up Pleasant Street from there, or?
Slightly offset.
Slightly offset. I think Pleasant Street's about offset right about here. We can look at that on the, Matt, your site plan after, I think.
So if you're coming down Pleasant Street, that's to the left, just for people at home?
Yeah.
A little bit. Kind of interesting. I'm not sure how you access that or get in or out.
Yeah, and the last slide will show that. And then one last strategic element here is that we did eventually, after the big break in the facade, we did pick up alignment here. So there's a strategy here to set an alignment So it sets an alignment with Main Street. It gives necessary relief, so you don't have too much massing, so nice break, and then sets a nice rhythm of what we're looking at as a New England townhouse style architecture, which we'll show you in some views. Next slide, thanks. And I'm going to invite Matt up just to quickly, we zoomed in real quickly on the public plaza, and if we can just touch on some of the look and feel and architectural components.
Sure, thanks, Bill. Matt Merva with Bowler, landscape architect. We're also the civil engineers on the project. Just really quickly, this is the front corner that Bill was talking about that we envision as a very public space that will be accessible by that curvilinear walk that will be ADA accessible down pretty significant grade, 5 or 6 feet to get down to that lower elevation, but really provide access for the public to a plaza space that would spill out from the retail that will be part of this redeveloped commercial space there. So we see that as a place for food trucks to park, possibly an outdoor fire feature, some cafe seating, decorative lighting, and a real kind of statement and welcoming place at that corner of the building. And I'll get into the open spaces a little more when I come back up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yep. So this is just a shot of the garage, the lower level. So the garage, again, the site topography plays a nice advantage in our mind on the way that the project works. We're continuing the main curb cut, maintaining that. We drop about a solid story. So all the parking, the entrances, the parking here is tucked under the entire building. So you don't really see that. And this is all covered parking. So under this building, there's 277, Steve, parking spaces. 211 covered in this area right here. And the advantage of putting all the parking underneath is it brings all the residential units above, which gets them out of the 100-year floodplain and gives them the daylighting and the views that they really deserve for the residents. Next slide, please. So this is the second floor plan. So the second floor plan utilizes currently the second floor of the existing mill, and it's a double-loaded format, which is one of the most efficient layout we can get. Really maximizes the full perimeter of the building. So a combination of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s. We're about 65% right now percentage on the studios and 1s, and then utilizing the 3s and the larger units at the corners. And then you can start to see the townhouse element shape a little bit differently along the front. Next slide, please. So then at the third floor, we're keeping the existing roof of the mill. So this is the existing second story, if you will, of the mill. So the building pulls back. So the third story does not touch this building, and it peels back there. So this is all the third story, maintains the same double-loaded corridor, and then this is the existing northernmost mill. Next slide. Again, the peel backs and the step backs are super important here. So then northernmost mill, abutting mill, we pull this back another almost 100 feet, creates a beautiful fourth floor amenity deck with expansive views over the mill pond to the north and to the west. And then this is the fourth floor part of the building right here. So as we get taller, the building gets smaller, and it steps away from the street is really what we're trying to do. And then next slide, please. And then the fifth floor, we kept that line intact, but we peel this back so that the piece that's along, the form that's along Main Street is only a 4-story. So the fifth story, the 5-story part of the building is 110 feet back from the edge of Main Street if we look at the street line, and we're going to look at that in a section. So this line right here is 110 feet back from the street at 5 stories, and that's less than 60% of the full lineal footage of the first floor. So it keeps getting smaller and smaller. And that is a strategy to allow light to come in and not overwhelm the street frontage. This is a little hard to read on this section, but the intent here is just to do a quick study of height. So this is a section that kind of cuts right through the dentistry and then jogs over and then goes up the courtyard. So here's the dentist, sort of the gable, 2.5-story, 3-story element. Here's the existing mill that we're looking at in elevation. And here's our 5-story building back. So again, from the street to the building. Doesn't look like much here, but it's 110 feet. And here's our building. You can see the site kind of slope down. That's the river that runs behind. And then here are some of the neighborhoods behind the building. So if you were to kind of take data points across, we're not wildly out of context, out of height context along the street because of the setback in our minds, the existing two-story mills in the front, and just the overall relief from that point. Next slide, please. And this is just a blow-up of a little bit closer. So here's the dentistry building. Here you got Main Street. And then here's that 110-foot building. And then this is the one of the mill buildings in elevation. And this kind of cuts it through sections. So the 5-story building in elevation, again, trying to keep that as far away as possible and keep the density tucked off to the west. Next slide. And so this is really right at Pleasant Street, a view, perspective view looking at the project. So you can see one of the mill buildings and with the stack in the back. And architecturally, we started with sort of two components. We started looking at how do we take a project that complements a light industrial mill building of New England and also feels residential and kind of complements I would say, a New England townhome concept or row house concept. So we took both of those kind of ideas and we started with the main part of the building, the big part of the building. So we started with a regularized large window layout and a very clean and coherent form. So just rectangular blocks that are clean, a very orderly set of windows, something that is reminiscent of a light industrial era of a mill building that you'd see in New England. Then we took a stab at creating the street frontage, aligning the row house component with the mills, and working with a couple architecture features that we felt were relevant and would complement the New England row house style, and also complement and pay respect to some of the architecture in the neighborhood. So by taking a gray brick, for instance, a light gray brick, it responds to the stone and the granite on the mills, doesn't mimic it, but pays respect to that. We also bring that back in some of the larger forms, so a lot of the more durable stones start to speak to some of the vernacular of the mill. Details of in response to the mansard roof, hints of that come back to the row house. Contemporary window bays with individual entry stoops create a presence and an entry point, a privacy entry point along the street, but also help break down the massing along the street and bring a residential feel to that. All those we feel complement the residential design of the building and don't overwhelm the massing of the building. Again, this form right here is 110 feet back from the main street. It's tough to see that here, but that's the 5 stories, and you can see it step to 4 here. So 4 stories here, 5 stories here, doesn't seem any taller because of the depth perception there, and then 4 stories. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is a view looking southeast. So this right to the left is that open public plaza that Matt described. You can see the stack in the background. So very highly vegetated. We see this as a very activated area all year, definitely in the spring, summer, and fall. The mill pond is directly, kind of behind us. You can see the 2 existing mills. We're going to restore those, keep those nice, really activate those with new windows, indoor, outdoor activity throughout the warm seasons. You can see just a piece of the 4-story. This is the roof deck that peels back, and then the 5-story way in the distance. And then last, to round that up, you can see this alignment on the street frontage. And this is the 4-story sort of New England row house element here. So again, for a pretty large building, you don't see much of the building when you approach it from this view or from the other view. You never really see the whole thing at once. And that's part of the concept architecturally on the massing. And I think, next slide, that concludes the architectural component. I'm going to bring Matt up to speak on landscape. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Bill. I'll go really quickly here. Again, Matt Merva with Bowler. I'll just walk through some of the site things that Bill didn't cover here. If you want to click to the next slide for me. This is just a plan showing the existing conditions, and I only pop this up so that you can see what the massing of the building footprint is now. It's that white area in the center surrounded by parking. If you click to our next slide, you'll see we're actually increasing the green area on site. We're decreasing the impervious area through this project. So we see that as a big net benefit. We are stepping back from the street, as Bill already mentioned. So the building is no closer than it is now. It's actually further back in most cases than it exists currently. We have access for the residents through that front auto court there, as Bill had mentioned. And really what we see as the public amenity here is that not just the public plaza space on the corner there that builds on the great work the town has done making good connections with sidewalks along Myrtle and Main, but really the whole green frontage there. We've increased the green space along the frontage of Main Street from about 6,000 square feet of lawn or green area to about 27,000 square feet of lawn or green area just in the front. From here to here is that increase, not even including what's going on in the back there. If you click ahead, we've already kind of discussed the parking. Just wanted to highlight that the bulk of our parking is covered and hidden from view under that podium. 211 covered spaces versus 179 on the surface. So you're really not seeing a lot of the parking associated with this use. Next slide, just touching on the grading quickly. Along Main Street and the pleasant frontage there, everything's at about elevation 194, just plus or minus, and then we're sloping down, ramping down to the parking area in the back and tucking the parking under so you're not seeing it from the street at about elevation 182. So there's more detail shown on these plans. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just from a grading and drainage standpoint, there'll be improvements to what's out there today. We're still going to be having the grading and drainage function in a lot of the same way it does today with tide gates through the wall and trying to infiltrate what we can, but providing storage and pumping to eliminate the stormwater on site and get it back to where it was originally going, but no different than it's currently configured. Next slide, if you would. Just showing the utility routing. Obviously, there were some questions highlighted from the board that we went over earlier on capacity, water, sewer. All of that's going to get worked out in great detail as we take it through the process here of the comprehensive permit. So we will get into that detail. We know we're going to have to meet with the DPW and talk through capacity. We've shown some preliminary locations for connections to services on this plan, but the details of that will get finalized as we get into more detail through the process here.
Yeah, just, I see there's a hand raised, and we'll I'm sorry. I see there's a hand raised. We will be taking questions following the presentation, so if you could hold your questions for that, and that includes questions of the developer and his team, so.
And that actually concludes my presentation as well. So
All right, well,
glad
thank you.
to take questions at this point, and
Sure.
I'll let Jeff wrap up. Thanks very much.
Mr. Chair.
So we appreciate the time. We know we covered a lot of things pretty quickly. Happy to answer questions. One thing I was remiss in not mentioning that certainly got a lot of attention, this is a 250-unit rental project, and under Chapter 40B, whether people think this is a good policy or not, all 250 units count on the town's subsidized housing inventory, not just the affordable units. So 250 units will go towards your SHI and will give the town great control over what has been discussed before, future 40B developments. So that's an important consideration. Also, and I would emphasize Councillor Haverty's guidance to the town about discussing school-age children, but it is important to recognize of the 250 units that we're proposing, we have 188 studios and one-bedroom units. Okay, that is overwhelming majority of the building. And if you go to other towns and look at their fiscal impact studies, those do not generate any school-age kids. And under Chapter 40B, we are required statutorily to do 10% three-bedroom units. So we have 25 three-bedroom units here, which we're required to do under the statute. So that's an important consideration when thinking about, you know, the number of people in the unit mix. People focus on density, and if we came back and said, hey guys, guess what? We're doing 200 units, and everybody cheers, and we say, yeah, we're going to do 200 four-bedroom units. I mean, that's a reduction of 50 units, but I would put it to the town that that's much more impactful on the municipal services. And I can say this because we've done it on other projects when we did LIPS and the like. This project, even considering the nominal number of school-aged kids from the non-one-bedroom units, will be very fiscally positive for the town, considering all fire, all police, all school-aged children. These generate a lot of tax revenues. Believe me, I know that, having paying the tax bills on our other projects right now. So it's a lot of tax revenue that the town fiscally can anticipate every year moving forward. So with that said, we don't have anything else to present tonight, and be happy to answer questions.
Before we get into public comment, which we will have a long session, any questions from the board? Go ahead.
I have a few. Thank you for the presentation, Jeff. I do have a couple of questions with respect to...
If you could stay at the mic.
Yeah, probably
thanks.
just want to stay there for a moment.
Don't know a lot about your company. You made some presentations with some of the projects that you had and currently involved with. I guess my first question would be, is this a project that you're just building and in 2 or 3 years you'll be selling it to somebody else, or is this going to be something that's going to be on your ledger for
No, that is not our model. In fact, yeah, the objective, for people unfamiliar, there are a fair amount of development companies. Their model is to permit, build, and sell, typically to a life insurance company, a pension company, private equity that wants to hold these assets. Our model is to capitalize, refinance out our investors, and then hold on our portfolio. So that's our intention, to be a long-term community neighbor in this case.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had is, it had to do with one of your design, the entryway on Myrtle Street, kind of narrow. You have a grade going down on Myrtle from Maine. You have an entryway coming in. Is that going to be a one-way? Because that's a kind of a blind side coming out.
Yeah, our expectation, and listen, one of the things, it's of all my experience, it's a favorite point of our discussion on all public hearings is traffic. We have not presented a traffic study, nor do we need to as part of the site approval process, but we are almost completed with our full traffic study that will be submitted as part of our comprehensive permit application. 2 unique things, or not so unique things, about the application and the site. One, there's a lot of traffic there already. I mean, it's a commercial property. It's not fully leased out. It could, under existing zoning, there could be a lot more people there and businesses than are there now currently. 2, there's 2 curb cuts. By and large, we plan on using both points of egress as they are now. We would be open to discussing, usually it's a discussion with the fire department. One of the nice things about this project is the fire department will have 360-degree access to the building, which typically they're thrilled about. But we have seen in some cases, a one-way in, one-way out, or parts of the site that are maybe one-way. I can say that the travel lanes are 24 feet between parking spaces, which is quite generous. But we will need to look at, and have preliminarily, and it will show up on our traffic study in terms of sight distance, sight lines. Yep. But by and large, the curb cut that we're proposing on Myrtle is the curb cut that's used today, with some enhancements.
I would hope there'd be some enhancements. Your curb cut on Main Street, you have the grade going down. Is that going to be the same grade, or will it be raised a little bit? Because you're going to be turning traffic into 4 travel lanes in that one area. And right now, it's difficult to get people out of there as it is now. especially for the people that in the commercial space down there right now. So if you have residential and they're gonna be going to work, same time that everybody else goes to work, you're looking at a major issue over there. And I hope there will be some discussion with the town about maybe coordinating something with traffic, additional traffic lights or changing the traffic control segment in that area, just to eliminate that, because I can see people getting upset that they can't get out and they'll just
That's
dash right out in front.
typically part of any process, and we wouldn't expect anything less. And I will guarantee you, the town will have or retain a peer review traffic consultant that will review everything that we do, and it's a, fairly kind of interactive process in terms of we like that, we don't like that. I mean, most of it is based on accepted industry practices, so same with civil engineering, people are talking the same language, it's like math. But it's absolutely something we look at. And to answer your first question, the grading more or less will be as it is today. I won't say it's identical, but as we've stated, there's about a 12-foot difference between the front of the site on Main Street and the rear of the site. So people have to get down there. So effectively, the grade will be not exact to what's out there today, but it won't be that different.
Okay, thank you. And you said you've already done a traffic study?
We're just about completed, yes. Our traffic engineer is Jeff Dirk from Vanas and Associates.
Okay.
In my opinion, he's the best traffic engineer in the state, but I would anticipate, if the town has reviewed other projects, special permits and the like, if it doesn't have a traffic consultant that it uses consistently, I know your counselor will make recommendations, and you guys can solicit bids to retain an expert that will, because it's important for people to recognize what we submit. It's not take our word for it, don't look at it, everything we say is exact. The town has the right to review, scrutinize, critique, evaluate everything that we're saying to make sure we're not, for lack of a better description, full of crap. So all of that process will go on during the public hearing process, including, traffic. And the municipal departments will be involved. We'll sit with fire. Because sometimes, I'll be honest with you, the fire department might want something different than what the traffic engineers are saying. And we defer to the fire department because they're really, the arbiters of life safety considerations. I wouldn't say that's the norm, but sometimes there's some nuances, like as you said, maybe a one-way in or not, or the like. So it's not necessarily just the peer review, it's also with municipal input.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Are there
Appreciate it.
questions from the board or the town manager?
I have just three very specific ones. So one, in that first building that's commercial, will it be 2 stories of commercial?
It remains to be seen. One of the things that people, in talking to the town, there was seemed to be kind of an interest for like a conversion into kind of a brew pub or something along that lines. So it might be 2 stories, but it may be open. In other words, like this is not quite 2, but it's, huge, tall ceilings and the like. So we haven't really programmed that out yet, so I don't mean to be evasive.
No, that's okay.
We obviously don't have a tenant, so we haven't really programmed it out.
Okay, second question, how many units are on the 5th floor?
37.
Okay.
We counted, 36 or 37.
Okay. And then my third question, you were showing the townhouse-type units in the front. Will there actually be entrances from the street into
Yes.
specific units?
Yes, those will be the only units in the building that actually have multiple entrances. And we did that because we wanted to create kind of the old school, front stoop, if you will, to those units. So you actually can enter directly from Main Street, but you can also enter into the back of your unit through the corridor. But we wanted to kind of activate Main Street, because that's really the only part of our entire building that's on Main Street, if you will. So it's, while they're townhouses, they're single level. Okay, that's an important, there's not an internal staircase. They're
Okay.
still fully accessible, ADA compliant, but they're single level, but they do have direct access onto Main Street.
How many of those are there?
There's 5 front entry stoops.
So 5 front entry stoops, okay. And then one last thing, and because this is a huge discussion here in town, is Are you married, or are you set on the actual colors and exteriors for those other buildings?
No,
'Cause-
not even close.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
and you know, and I'll be honest with you, there's a few things that we represented that I'm not crazy about in terms of
Okay,
colors. So
that's good to hear.
We'll flesh that out, you know, when
Okay.
there's, you know, a lot of discussion on that. So, because I know there was some concern about that. So to answer your question, no.
Great.
Or yes, I forget how you
Yeah,
phrased
that's
it,
okay.
but
I
yeah.
get your,
Uh-huh.
we're at the same place. Okay.
All right,
So
Mike? Oh, sorry.
I just want to say, so if you're going to ask questions, we're going to ask that the microphone and
Yeah.
people line up along this side of the wall.
I'll get to that in a minute. but-
If you have a question, that's,
I just want to see if we can get to the people up here because somebody's already dropped off.
yep,
Yeah, no,
we're
we'll get
about
to
do
them.
that.
We're trying to finish up. Michael, did you have some questions?
Yeah, it's, so, you know, I think some of the frustration you might be sensing is, you know, you talk about the regional need for housing and everything, and I agree that that's an issue, but I think unlike a lot of communities that you've been in, Ashland has already built or permitted a significant amount of units. So from 2010 to 2020, you know, we went from 6,500 units to 7,500 units. We've got permitted or in construction right now an additional 500 units. And with the 240B projects, that's an additional 500 units. So it's actually an increase of like 33% if you add all of those together. And that just leads me to this question, and please don't get offended by it, but I'm going to ask Joe's question a different way, because I can't tell you how many different developers I have asked if they are going to hold on to the projects, and they say yes, and then 5 years later they're gone. So how many, can you tell me how many rental units have you built and how many do you still own?
I mean, we're not an old company, and the development cycle is a long time. So I can say of the rental units SLV is built, we own 100% of them.
Okay.
So I don't know how else to put
No,
it than
that's-
that. Also, nothing that has been said tonight I've found offensive or
Okay.
frustrating. I mean, honestly, and we'll look forward to public comment. My experience so far in Ashland has been quite collaborative. Do I expect everybody to throw rose petals and roll out the red carpet? No, I do not. But with that said, I mean, I think, obviously I'm biased, but I think there's a great project to be had here. We're starting out, and I look forward to, you know, continuing the process and getting the input of the town.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. So this starts our public comment period. I want to thank you all for staying with us. It's been a long night. I would just say, so as Yolanda started talking about, so if you're on Zoom, if you raise your hand, we'll try to keep track, and I'll rely on Peter to we'll alternate. If you're in the room and want to speak, we do have a microphone. I would suggest, why don't you line up against the wall here with the person in front would speak first and have the microphone. That'll give us an idea of how much comments we're looking at here. And so try to be, I see Joel's cutting. He's cutting. We caught you, Joel. Look at him.
Joel, go around the other way. 'Cause we're not going to use this microphone, we're going to use the handheld.
Yeah, there's going to be handheld. So Cliff will start.
Joel thought he was going to find a way to get it first.
Yeah. So Joel, just go over there behind Anna, okay? We'll get to everybody, believe me. Okay. Okay, hold on a second, just Cliff. So we've got the microphone turned on. Just a reminder to keep your, you can ask questions of the developer, or you can address the board. Please keep your questions concise and to the point. Be mindful that we've talked about a number of things. If you want to refer to something that was said earlier and say that you want to emphasize that point, fine. But if I see you repeating things and going on, I will ask you to cut it short and stop. So be concise and mindful of other people who want to speak. And I think, Peter, if you'll just remind me, we'll alternate between people in the room and people on Zoom. Okay, go ahead, Cliff.
Okay, Cliff Wilson, 378 Elliott Street. Two quick questions. Number one, does SLB currently own the property? No, okay.
Oh, I think that's a joke.
You should be at the microphone.
Yes.
You can answer questions.
Yes, if you feel comfortable standing there, yes. And we can, all the questions don't need to go to Jeff. They can be, if you want to address us about general questions, go ahead. Oh.
We have the property under purchase and sale.
And the second question is, assuming this all went through and all the permits are going, and you're going to start tomorrow, what type of a time period are we looking at for the demolition and the building of the new structure?
Good question. This is not, compared to some of the other projects, this has a little bit more complication. We're talking about some renovation. We're also talking about a site that has some environmental considerations that we need to really address. So I would say, you know, we're probably looking at from when we start to like when we're have our first certificate of occupancy, 26 months, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Peter, you got,
Yeah,
oh,
so-
and just a note, if people aren't comfortable standing for long periods of time, just raise your hand and we'll let you go to the front of the line. But go ahead, Peter, you want someone from Zoom?
Sure, so the first person on Zoom is Helen Nicole. Helen Nicole, I will ask you to come forth.
Hi, I did try to put my video on, but it's not letting me.
That's okay, Helen, we'll take your word for it, okay.
Okay. Helen Nicole, 4 Elliott Circle. So I do have a lot of concerns, but I'm going to focus tonight just on the historic aspects of those buildings. So you are actually taking down 1.5 of those buildings, it looks like. They're the 2 granite buildings. One looks like the facade of the front half will stay, and then one whole building will stay. The previous development that was supposedly going into that same space was planning to reuse the granite. The granite's historic granite, the mills are historic, the downtown has a historic character and a history of and culture with those mills. And I'm wondering if you are planning or what you are planning to do with that granite, because I'm hoping you're going to at least reuse it in that development.
Great question. I would say we would love to. I would also say you're asking a pretty technical construction question, and one that we will certainly be receptive to get input on. But at this point in time, I couldn't say definitive how we would plan to use that. But I think we would be really excited, whether it was on our site or giving it to the town or whatever. I mean, I think there's some opportunities there, but we recognize that it certainly has value. And we would be, you know, amenable discussing that with our architectural team, with our contractors and the like. So stay tuned for that, but it's a point that's noted, and, you know, we can talk about that in more detail as we get a little bit more advanced.
Okay, thank you.
Larry DeYoung. Larry DeYoung, 106 Sudbury Road. Couple of questions. One is the interior court space. What is the material that is there that you're going to use to make that? Because it's elevated over the parking lot. I have a second question after this.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm not sure I know.
You talk about absorption, but there's not going to be any absorption there.
Well, yeah, structurally, so the question was, what will the raised courtyard be constructed with? So we haven't nailed down the construction methods of the project. It could be a concrete, but it's probably going to be a concrete on metal deck that'll be recessed down from the finished floor of the residences. Right. And there'll be a mix of materials on the surface, right? It could be a series of adjustable wood pavers or concrete pavers. It could be some plant beds, some different mediums for pathways and gathering. So it's a series of decks, green grasses, sods, turfs, all those components, which are all built up above on a elevated deck.
Okay, so that's really now at this point in a design stage.
Absolutely, early design stage.
Okay, thank you.
It's very conceptual.
The second question that I have is, On the entire parcel of land that I've seen, there's a large green area that goes easterly along the river, and I see absolutely no development there whatsoever. What's going on with that? Why isn't that being used?
It's the existing spillway.
It may be wet, it may have environmental issues.
Existing
but
what?
I think he's talking about the existing spillway for the overflow.
Right.
The area.
Yeah, there's some resource areas that we can't do anything in. One of the things that we actually would be interested in getting more information from the town is there's our understanding that there's some sort of walkway or pathway back in that area that we would be amenable to kind of tying into if there was some way. We don't know a lot about that, so that would be something that would be open to discussing with the town. But basically, the project that we've proposed is being confined to the area that has already been disturbed and is impervious. We are not expanding beyond any of the paved area. In fact, I think as we've represented, there'll be much less pavement when we're done than there is today. So that's hopefully an explanation on why some of the areas that were shown, which are within the site boundaries, we're not touching or developing.
So there's no way even to use that for possible recreation?
Well, perhaps passive recreation in terms of integrating with, if there is in fact a pedestrian path or whatnot back there, we would certainly be open to whatever kind of passive recreation we can do that would not run afoul with DEP regulations or, you know, riverfront or any of those considerations. But we're open to discussing that with the town.
With 250 units, you're going to get a lot of people that are going to want to spread out during the summer months.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Peter, is there anybody next on Zoom that we want?
Yeah, next up is Leah Suarez. Leah, I am asking you to unmute. Please step forward.
Hi, Leah Suarez of 25 Valley Road. I just had a question related to what Mr. Minani said earlier. I noticed there's several driveways going in and out of your complex. If I'm parked at your complex and I need to make a left onto Main Street, which driveway do you envision people using, and how feasible do you think it is to make a left out of that driveway?
Excuse me. Both driveways that we have, I guess, 4 curb cuts, but 2 are just to the guest and delivery and drop off in the front. 2 are the primary ones where most of the cars are going to be going, which are existing today. So they're both one-way, 2-way in, 2-way out. So I think you could use either, but realistically, I understand with existing traffic patterns, the one on Main Street would be more challenging. So people may naturally select the one on Myrtle. But that's something that we'll certainly look at more intently with the town's consultant and our own consultant.
Okay, thank you.
I would also mention one thing to people that have not been through this process before. We hear a lot of, you're going to need a traffic light. That is not at our discretion or even the town's discretion. There's a state warrant. There's a state warrant that you need to meet. I think it's 10 different criteria, not 5 of 10, but all of them, in order to have a light implemented. So, and that's harder to meet than you would think. But a lot of people say, you'll need a light. That's not at our discretion. It's at the state DOT. Short of a light, though, there are traffic calming patterns, there's signage, there's all sorts of other things that we can do to dictate how traffic flows in and out of our site. And we plan to do all of that to the greatest extent possible.
Sure. Hold on, go ahead.
Jeff, just to expand a little bit on that, I think one of the things we might be asking is not necessarily to add an additional light, but to line things up to where, with the existing light. So the entrance and exit to your development with Pleasant Street and Main Street.
Sure. So I'll be open to discussing that.
Okay, thank you. Next, I think we got Paul, why don't you go ahead.
Yes, Paul Pohoviac, 40 Lakeview Terrace. I've got a couple questions for the developer. How can you say that, you've only been in business for 5 years, how can you say that your deal is
You gotta
that...
talk into the microphone, please.
Your deal is that you don't, sell your properties. And I'd like to say, I've got a lot of experience with traffic studies, with sight lines. I've got degrees in civil engineering, building construction. And I think Joe brought up a very good point along with Michael. Cars are coming down off Route 9 and Mass Pike, going down Myrtle Street. They're going 45 miles an hour in front of the waterfalls, and you've got an exit coming right out there, and it doesn't receive hardly any traffic now. But putting those units back there, they're going to cheat, and when they come down there and they meet 75 other cars backed up all the way beyond Pine Hill Road, that they're going to cheat and they're going to scoot in there. They're going to scoot in there. It's just, the project, I think, is just not right for Ashland, because it just, you can talk about building setbacks, height restrictions, but that doesn't address the real problem. It's going to be a cluster, what?
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Anybody on Zoom?
Yep, next up on Zoom is LK. LK, I am unmuting you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lenny Kerensky, and I actually live 2 houses away from this location, so I'm probably going to affect it a lot. First of all, I want to say thank you to Jeff and his team for great presentation. And with all resistance and negativity, I personally love this project, and I feel really jealous for people who get apartments on the 5th floor and have an awesome view. But, and I also think out of all units town is putting right now, that's probably going to be the best looking. But the question I have is, did you guys review that pollution from the Nyanza factory? Is that going to be an issue? Is some research about that? Are you going to do something there to mitigate that?
Yes, we will. I'll let, who wants to answer? You have your LSP here. That will all be ameliorated as part of this project. They're required to handle that. But I don't know, you want to just give a short statement on that?
The short statement is yes, we're very well aware of it, and yes, we're already involved in the process with DEP on meeting all the regulations on how we're going to address that. So it is very much, under our consideration. It is also a process that's separate and distinct from this 40B process, because it's a state permit, state entity. And if for some reason we were unable to address the issues that, are inherent on the site, we would have a problem, to be quite candid. So we have to be able to satisfy DEP that we're doing all the necessary measures and taking all the necessary action, to address
Great.
the issues.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If I should,
We've had quite a history with
Do you have
that.
experience with that, or your team?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the licensed site professional, safety.
He's,
Just to address the question. First of all, I want to say quite a bit of work has already been done on the property, and of course, Nyanza. I know people know that here. And we're continuing to monitor. We have a long-term monitoring program on the site. And I just wanted to follow up on what Jeff said, is we've already been working with quite a bit with Mass DEP. The other thing I can add is the apartments will be all above an open-air garage, parking garage. So that'll mitigate any potential vapor intrusion into those structures. So I think we have a very good plan, and we'll be continuing to work with Mass DEP throughout the process.
Great, thank you. John, you're up.
Good evening, John Featherston, 98 Heritage Avenue, and also a Commonwealth Affordable Housing Commissioner.
Great, and past select board member. I have to put that plug in. Yeah.
tread.
Oh, and Board of Health, all right, that's
Yeah,
enough.
I was interested in the mitigation on the property, because I'm not aware of that, but I'd like to talk to you maybe offline. Grossly disappointed that you mentioned the word curb cut 19 times, and there was no public transportation shelter mentioned in those curb cuts.
Interesting.
You mean like a bus stop?
Public transportation shelter, yes. Not necessarily in the 21st century, the bus stop, yeah.
Interesting thought.
I mean, candidly, I'm not sure I understand the question, but confidently.
Why don't you have a bus stop? I'll make it simple.
Well, maybe it's an oversight. I mean, all
It's
our
not very
projects.
friendly.
Well, no, all our projects have a bus stop for, if you're talking about like the school-age kids that we have that would
No.
get picked up, just public in general, for the
Yeah,
public
we have
bus.
we have a,
Regional transit, regional public transit.
so we'll have we're
Well,
the Metro West Transit Authority, could potentially be a stop, plus you're close to the commuter rail station, that sort of thing.
We would be open to that. I mean, candidly, I mean, as I said.
But then you're going to have to look at really serious mitigation on Main Street for a curb cut to accommodate a regional transportation bus.
Be in the parking lot? Be in the parking lot?
No, because they won't go into the parking lot.
I don't know. Admittedly, I'm a little over my skis on this issue. If there's a bus stop on the street, wouldn't the bus just stop and pick people up?
Not with your traffic, that havoc you're going to cause, no.
Yeah, but I live in
Yeah.
heavily
Very
trafficked.
friendly.
All right, I think it's a good point, and we'll keep that in mind. John, do you have something else?
Yeah, and this is a real important question because, as I said, as a housing commissioner, there's nothing more urgent in the Commonwealth than getting affordable housing for residents. But I'm concerned about who your customer is, and I'll ask Mr. Mignani's and Mr. Herbert's question in a third way. What does your customer have to look like for you to achieve profitability? And more importantly, who's going to manage that portion of the property for you? And then I just have a third question on that.
Not sure.
So Jeff, maybe you can explain what the expected rents are for the affordable and the
Well,
market rate units.
relative to the property, for a project of this size, we would use an institutional manager that is known and highly experienced in managing these types of developments. We tend to use Greystar, who we think is the best in the business. You can look them up. So they would be the property manager. Relative to the affordable units, we would use SEB Housing to facilitate our affirmative marketing and fair housing plan. So they would be responsible for screening all the applicants that are interested in the housing. We work very closely with the municipality and any affordable housing groups to outreach and make sure we're reaching all of the interested parties in the town of Ashland that may be interested in this housing. And also those rents are prescribed by the state based on the area median income in the metropolitan area, so those are not established by us as the developer. So everything is fairly prescriptive, but I would tell you that this project will be, professionally managed by, it's not, we're not like, all due respect, and I drive a pickup truck, but outfits that, somebody driving their pickup truck, handling landscaping on their own and snow removal and and doing the plumbing and whatnot. That's not how we would own and manage this building.
Thank you. And John, one
And then
more
just to
question.
follow up on that, and you raised a point, so it could turn into a migrant shelter.
No.
Yeah. All right. All right, John, so you made your concerns.
I'm not concerned.
It's-
It's a topic that needs to be touched. With the migrant shelter problem in Commonwealth right now, there's no housing. I happen to run a migrant shelter, right now. I know there's no housing. If his management company would entertain the opportunity to become a migrant shelter, it's a conversation that needs to be had in public.
Is there any statement you could make about your plans that, I think it's market rate rental housing plus 25%, so I don't see why it would be migrant housing any more than any other apartment building.
I don't,
Because you made the comment earlier about, how it would help towards Ashland's stock, so that's the only reason.
Yeah.
Well, that is not in dispute. It would, the affordable housing. Secondly, And I'm not an attorney, but I think our permit would preclude us from doing anything of that nature. We have a regulatory agreement that we're signing with Mass Housing. It's a long document. It's very clear in terms of,
Thank you, Jeff.
Honestly, I don't think that's an issue.
Jeff, while you're up there, could I just ask, have you done projects where a certain percentage of the housing is reserved or prioritized for town employees?
Yes, yes. Almost every project we've worked on has what's called a local preference, and we work closely. Usually, and forgive me, I should know this, but I think there's 4 categories that are allowed by the state. Town employees, people that live in the town, people that have direct relatives that live in the town, and there's one other one. But anyway, those 4 categories can be used as part of a local preference so that those people are given priority for the affordable housing that is, available. Or
Thank
that's
you.
marketed.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we'll alternate with Zoom now, but I think I have Kate as the last person in the room. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question who isn't standing up? Just let us know. We're just trying to plan how much more time we need. All right, so it looks like Kate will be the last one in the room to speak, and you've got one person left on Zoom, Peter?
Yes, one person left on
Go
Zoom.
ahead.
Amanda Hayes, please step forward.
Amanda Hayes, 21 Roseberry Drive, and along the concerns around traffic and transportation and some of the notes around the location being so proximate to the MBTA station, has there been any consideration given to running shuttle service to the train station to potentially reduce the number of people that are commuting, using the train, but also using their car? Just reiterating Ms. Suarez's point around how difficult that is to get out at rush hour.
So, and you're aware of where the commuter rail station is, Jeff? Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we like the site.
Okay.
I know the 250 units seems like a ton to some people, but I can say with great certainty there's not enough demand from that size to warrant a shuttle unique to our property. But if the town had some sort of shuttle or was contemplating a shuttle on a greater scale, we certainly would be amenable to participating in that, paying a fair share and the like. But I can say with a high degree of certainty will not likely have a dedicated shuttle because there's not enough units. People come and go at different times. It just doesn't warrant it. So,
All right, thank you. Next, sir, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Alex Keefe over on Pine Hill Road. I know a lot's been talked about traffic, so my question's with the study that you're completing. Are you including the adjoining roads such as Pine Hill, Winter Street, Water Street, Moran Drive, Strobus Lane, and those being cut-throughs that might be a potential? Being a former police officer of the town with Mr. Mignani, I can tell you the average speed coming down Myrtle Street is about 40. That's why I usually clock people at when I pulled them over, and that is a high accident area on the Myrtle Street side due to that cut. So definitely something you're going to want to look at through the study.
Good point.
If you wouldn't mind. More importantly, noise is a question I have. Going to be produced since the height of the building, as well as the overshadowing that might be caused with shading issues that could cause potential ice over on the roads. And I know Southborough, when they defeated a 40B, it had to do with access, and one of their issues was with the railroad. So wondering if that's going to play into it, because one of their issues was when the freight train cut into that back area where they were proposing it, it was cutting off emergency access. Obviously, the train's not right next to the building, but is that something that's going to be considered as well?
I don't know.
I don't really understand that question. We're not.
About the train.
I don't know. Forgive me, but I don't understand the question relative to the train and the cutoff and the point you were making. I'm not trying to be evasive, but could you rephrase it, or?
Yeah, so I guess I'm looking at The overall study of the roads and the patterns through the traffic study of how it's going to be accessible for emergency access. The town's just invested roughly $1.7 million into a new ladder truck, working with the fire department to make sure that can make the turning radiuses and such.
Okay, I can answer that.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the things, again, we like about the site is the fire department will have 360-degree access. They'll have 2 ways in and out. And we will have our civil engineering team from Bowler. We use a template, if you will, that shows the largest fire truck in the town, maneuverability through the site. We'll make the fire department comfortable that they can access everywhere they need to go, that the bull nose at the entrances are appropriate. So all of that will be looked at, and I have every degree of confidence that it will meet whatever the fire department is looking for.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Roberta, go
Hi,
ahead.
Roberta Suleman, 28 Woodridge Lane. I want to thank you guys for your presentation tonight, and you actually can sit down. I don't have a question.
Hey, Jeff, there's a,
So I want to
Jeff's getting a
thank you
workout in.
for
Thanks, Jeff.
all of you for coming for your presentation and for staying so late. And it seems like you have a thick skin, so I'm just going to let it rip. Okay? I have a couple of comments. One is aesthetically for the building, and my apologies to the architects, but I think it's one ugly building. It's way too high for the area, and the use of the historic buildings that Helen is so concerned about seems like an amazing afterthought. They just seem to be like stuck on the end and not really integrated well into the design. And to get back to Yolanda's point, I really hope that there is reconsideration for the color and the materials so that it might have a chance of looking blended together better and maybe be more aesthetically pleasing. The other issue people have talked about with the traffic, Friday afternoon at 4:30, I was coming down Main Street from Route 126, going towards the property, which would be on my right-hand side. The traffic coming in the other direction was stopped at Pleasant Street, backed up past Pine Hill Road, and all the way up the hill and around the corner as far as I could see. So I'm hoping that your traffic study takes that into account. We had a developer here once provide us with a traffic study that they did in the summer when people were away. Now, I know you're not doing that because you're doing it now, but a traffic study that isn't there when the traffic is there is useless to everybody concerned. There's also, it's a really narrow road over there. It's really narrow coming down that hill, and it's windy, and I think the sight line is going to be really awful. And it's narrow going over the bridge by Mill Pond and by the Pine Hill Road and by the waterfall. And I think that's a real safety issue, not just volume of traffic, but safety. And finally, I was part of the committee that helped to do the Riverwalk and the renovation of Mill Pond Park and the bridge that goes over the water. And I'm glad you see that as an amenity to the tenants in your building, but it makes me incredibly sad that that building will be right across the street and kind of ruin the aesthetics of that natural environment in that natural area. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Roberta. All right, Joan?
Joan Goodfriday, One Shore Road. I am on the Historical Commission, but speaking as a resident. I have a few quick questions and then a comment. First is, will there be a residence? I know you mentioned that Greystar will be managing the building, but will there be a resident superintendent in the building to maintain the building and keep the harmony of the area?
With Greystar, typically there's not a resident, someone living at the property, but I assure you there is 24-hour, 365 emergency response from Greystar. So we're not successful if we have tenants and residents that don't have their issues addressed quickly. So we have another project that does have a resident super. I can't commit to that, but I would say it's probably more unlikely than likely.
And how high is, I'm sorry, how far from the street are the front steps of the townhouses?
I'd say that varies from maybe 19 to 30-something feet as that angle sort of opens up.
And the difference in height from the front building to the back building, the actual height?
1 story. So about 11 feet would be the difference between the 4-story on the front and the 5-story on the rear.
You mentioned that the townhouses were 1 story, so what does that mean?
No, I'm sorry if if I misspoke. The townhouse building, if you will, where they have the direct entrance, each unit is 1 level, but they're flats. There's 4 levels, but somebody's apartment will be 1 level.
Okay.
Does
So
that make
in the
sense?
front, and you go up to the 4 floors?
Through an elevator, yes. In that area, yes.
Okay. And did you look at keeping the 3rd building of the mill buildings?
We did.
And I'd like to echo Helen's comments on trying to keep the granite at least and incorporate it into your design.
We agree with you. Oh, boy.
And I have one more question, sorry, please bear with me. The height of the height of the, I'm sorry, the height of the 6 stories?
5 stories.
Well, it's plus the garage, so in the
Okay.
back it's 6, and I believe that's 69 feet 11 inches. And I'm wondering if it were just a little bit higher, you'd be required to meet additional safety parameters, I believe. And I'm wondering if you will be incorporating those into your project.
I can say this, that this building will meet every applicable code, and I can say this also, that it will be monumentally more safe than the building is there now. Right. So it will be under, I think, below the provision that you're referencing.
By 1 inch, right?
Thank you.
All right.
By 1 inch, right.
All right, thank you, Joan. Hand it off, yeah.
Brian Mallett. We live on 14 Water Street, which is obviously going to be impacted, pretty heavily by this project. A few questions, if you guys don't mind. So on the point of traffic, again, we live right across the street from this. Water Street is already used as a cut-through by many people at, I would say, very high speeds. We have small children. Our neighbors all have small children. I guess for the board, is there any consideration to putting like speed bumps or any speed mitigation things on Water Street? Safety for us is a big concern. We have dogs, small children. Adding, 250 units to the end of our street is only going to increase what we already discussed as a neighborhood as a major problem. So,
Brian, if I can interrupt you, that your question has been well received by the Traffic Study Committee, Safety Committee, and I'm the chair of that committee. We've been in contact with one of your neighbors who gives us video weekly with respect to that matter. It's being looked at with respect to speed bumps. There is some concerns about speed bumps and liability. So we're looking into that, but we've also talked about putting additional signage up there. Traffic study will be done as well, but it takes a while to get all those things completed. So your question and the concerns have definitely been heard by us, and we're working on it.
okay, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
My second question is, other than traffic studies, are you guys planning on, or have you done any studies on the crime impact, like increasing crime that this might bring to the area? Again, with small children, raising a family here. Major concern of ours is adding, 250 units of low-income housing at the end of our street.
I'll answer that. It's not low income, so it's affordable housing, which means
What's the difference?
so low income is when you think of like Section 8, very low, they might have vouchers, things like that. This is only 25% is going to be the affordable housing portion, which means you have to meet a certain income requirement. The other 75% of this building are going to be market rate apartments, and current market rate is not cheap, so
Right.
it's
Neither-
not, it's
neither is
not.
the affordable
and-
housing.
the affordable housing. So I think the idea that, your
but-
concern about crime, that's not necessarily
It's not a concern.
valid or a concern because of the type of people that most likely will be living here.
Interesting. So, but they're mostly one-unit apartments, right? So these aren't families moving in here.
There will
Well,
be
he
some.
mentioned,
There
he
will be
meant,
some.
it was mentioned that
10% 3-bedroom.
10%, yeah, so about, 10% is 3-bedroom.
200.
25 of them will be 3-bedroom, so that could be families. 188 of them are gonna be studios and 1-bedroom apartments.
Well, it's a little bit concerning, just to be honest, that you just dismissed that out of hand. I think it
I'm,
should be.
I'm
looked
not,
into.
what I was dismissing was when you were saying low-income housing. Low-income housing is usually much lower incomes. They are, they have vouchers for housing is considered low income. Affordable housing, you still have to meet income requirements, but most of them are still working and things like that. As we were saying, it's workforce housing. So for some of our town employees who are teachers or firemen or things like that, I think, what's the current income for
For a family of 4? Are you
Yeah.
talking about the AMI?
Yeah.
It's like $84,000?
Yeah, so these are, these people are making anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 for these affordable housing units,
you.
depending on the unit.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Outside of that, my last question is just, do you guys have any info on the impact of valuation of surrounding houses based on projects like this?
For this particular project, no, but I can tell you anecdotally that there's never been any studies or analysis that said anything that any 40B project had any negative impact on home valuations in any municipality.
Michael or anybody on the board, are you familiar with property studies like that?
Yeah, so there have been a few done, and I can't name them specifically right now, but they're consistent with what Jeff said. They haven't necessarily seen a correlation with a decrease in surrounding property values.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next. Go ahead, Ash.
Someone else online?
Is there someone you want to?
Ashwin Chandani, 10 Arbor Road. I am the chair of the Sustainability Committee, but I'm speaking as a resident. Two separate sort of areas of questions. So first one, we've been talking about 25% of the units are affordable housing. Does the entirety of the project count towards our?
Yes.
So all 250 will still be counted?
Yes. Correct.
Do we have any feeling for, let's assume that this project was to go forward, at what percentage we would land at post the project?
We would be up in the 8% range.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, if you took this project by itself.
By
right?
itself, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And then the question for you guys is, what kind of sustainable features are you planning to build into the property? Are you considering going either FIRES or net zero on this property? Recent studies show that especially for dense housing, which is a good thing, not necessarily always in this context, but overall from a sustainability perspective, it's a good thing. There's a lot of opportunity for you guys to go fire zero and not really have a material impact on your cost.
I will say this. One of the things that Councillor Haverty said at the beginning is under 40B, you're only required to do a sketch plan. That's not our style. I mean, you can tell already, we do a pretty good plan, and we'll have more details for the zoning board. What you're asking is a certainly legitimate question, but a more specific technical construction question that we've not fully vetted. I will say this. There was a lot of discussion before about the stretch code and whether that's applicable or not. I have every expectation we'll, at a minimum, meet that. So the whole discussion we were having earlier is obsolete. But then we'll work closely with Embark, who's always, advancing and thinking about these things. So give us a little time on that. We haven't fully vetted it, but we'll definitely, it's the way of the world these days and something to be carefully considered.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I think that's,
And
go
with
ahead,
that,
Ash.
would you potentially be considering on-site solar or EV charging within the unit, or all-electric units? Or would you be looking at fossil fuels as well?
Well, all of our projects have a certain number of EV charging stations. Solar is something that's continually advancing. I wouldn't say we would rule that out. So all the things that you're talking about are definitely things, but at a minimum, we'll have a lot of EV charging stations. Whether or not we're all electric in the units remains to be seen. It seems like that's kind of how things are evolving, but stay involved, as we advance the project will be.
Great.
Well, I mean,
You don't need to say that
right,
twice.
right.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Anna.
Good evening, Anna Tesmanitsky for Meeting House Path, Ashland, Mass. Speaking today as a resident. I wanted to thank the Select Board, Rich, who's in the room, and the developer for being willing to do this particular forum for the public. For some context, although I'm speaking as a resident, I am a planning board member. I'm also on the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. And this particular forum was born out of a comprehensive plan meeting in the box. And so I wanted to thank Michael and the select board chair specifically for being willing to make this forum happen as a result of that discussion.
That's right.
And because it was born out of a comprehensive plan meeting in a box, I wanted to lay out that context for the 3 questions that I'm about to ask. And what I will do, being a lawyer, is I don't want to bombard you with too many questions, but I'm going to just give you all 3, and you can answer them in whatever way you like. So question number 1 has to do with fiscal impact. And I'm assuming, Jeff, you're willing to work with the town to use the fiscal impact calculator that the planning board already has available to it. And you did mention some data points that you already have from your prior projects. And are you willing to share your own tax data in whatever way you're comfortable to show the town, hey, for these projects, and you don't have to answer all 3 of my questions, you might want to hear them first. It might be easier. So are you willing to share your tax data, if you will, in a way that you're comfortable, where you could lay out for the town, okay, here's my projects, here's my number of apartments, here's my ratio of studios, 1-bedrooms, multi-family or multi-bedroom, here's the towns, their tax brackets, and the tax revenue that I pay, in a way that would make you comfortable, so that we could not only have the fiscal calculator, but your own data to better understand this wonderful tax revenue that you believe you can bring to town.
Oh.
That's question 1. Question 2 is zoning. So coming from the perspective, again, as a resident who happens to serve on the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, question 2 has to do with 2 potential zoning changes. One is currently the downtown area does not allow for hotels. If the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee or the Planning Board presents a zoning change allowing for hotels downtown, is that something that would be interesting to you as a developer?
Huh.
Similarly, Airbnbs, how have you addressed those types of zoning changes in other communities where you have development? Have you worked with either planning boards or select boards to develop Airbnb-related regulation, and how do you regulate Airbnbs in your rentals? And then the last question has to do with, would you be willing to come to the steering committee for the comprehensive plan and be part of the conversation? Since being a developer here long-term, you are essentially becoming part of our community, and your voice and your contribution to our comprehensive planning would be very important. Those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Do you want to address any of those now? Or you don't, or take them under advisement? I do want to say the Airbnb is a great concern.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's something that we'd rely on you to solve, but you're welcome to.
I can say this, I like to stay in hotels. That's about the extent of what I know of them. I can say emphatically we have no interest, and we're a multifamily residential developer. We're not a hotel developer, so we would not develop a hotel.
I think, do you have any measures
circumstance.
to ensure that won't be happening? I think that's the gist, or is there anything in the industry? Do we do that?
Are you talking about the short-term rentals?
Yes.
now, Rob?
Oh, that's a different question.
Well, I thought the Airbnb was the same.
The Airbnb is easily legislated by the zoning board. You can, as part of the comprehensive permit issuance, you can prohibit that.
Okay, so
So
something to think
if
about,
tenants were Airbnb their unit, they'd be in violation of the permit and their lease.
Okay.
And we could proceed with an eviction. So that's an easy one. So that hotel question, Airbnb question, I would be honored to go to some, I don't know about when you meet or whatever, but I would be happy to participate. And then our fiscal impacts, We did not do any for this development, nor are we required to, but for different reasons in different municipalities, we have, and those are not outdated, and I would be happy to share those with you. We did one in Walpole, we did one in, I think we did one in Winchester. I have and the methodology is the same. It's basically, you look at the number of units, the bedroom types, the anticipated kids, they look at some of the specific elements of the municipality, tax rate, obviously. So I could share those with you. I'd be very happy to. And then I think it would just be a little legwork on the town taking your own tax rate and stuff, because the methodologies, as you'll see, are basically the same. And I think you could arrive at, some basic conclusions. And then I'd be, happy to talk if we don't need, under 40B, you do not need to do a fiscal impact analysis. But if as part of our discussion it became critical for whatever reason, or part of our negotiation or whatnot, I'm not going to close the book on that. But, it's not an insignificant cost to us to do that, and it's not required. But I wouldn't say necessarily we're not doing it. But let us share with you what we've done, and then come back if you have any suggestions.
Brief comment. It tends to be presented.
Can you use the microphone, Anna, please?
The fiscal issue, although not required, does come up a lot when projects like this are presented. And so it tends to be sort of a marketing mention of, hey, this is going to be great for your revenue. So I think if it's going to continue to be presented that way to the public, it would be advantageous to see your actual calculations.
And we do have a model we've used in the past, correct, that we could use this to implement?
Yeah, I mean, I have serious concerns with the accuracy of it, but
something to think
yeah,
about,
yeah.
And how it applies here. Okay. Oh, and just, Anna, thank you for your kind comments. I do want to point out that the select board as a whole was involved in the planning and discussion of this session. So anyway.
Well, I think she gave you credit for it.
Yeah, no, the select board as a whole.
Yeah.
Oh, as a whole?
Yeah.
Then okay. Kate, go ahead.
Catherine Jerzyk, 11 Rodman Road. I'm a member of the planning board, but I'm speaking as a member of the public. And my question / comment is to the select board. So I have to be honest, I was a little disappointed. I'm thankful that the developer came to do this, but was talking about some negotiations that happened. And that's kind of, not negotiations, but discussion. So I feel like that this room was filled, Zoom was filled, people have an interest, so we have to be letting the public know about when things are happening. Like if people are meeting with developer on a project of this scale in our downtown, there needs to be a memo kind of published on the website. And I'm asking kind of...
This is the first time I've met these individuals.
Me too.
I haven't
Never
met
met
with
these
anybody,
people,
so I
never
don't know
met
what
them.
you're trying to say.
I don't know who, I just know it was mentioned.
Yeah.
So...
I mean,
Let's explore that a little bit. Yeah, I don't think she's talking about you,
I think
Joe,
it's a
so-
legit question or a legit thing to ask.
So my request is that when we have these on this, I guess the developer probably knows Nyanza is a wound to our community, right? And this site is critically related to that as well. So for both general democracy, transparency, and civic engagement and involvement, I'm asking that you will do that. I'm also saying on this particular site, this is extremely sensitive to our community. So I think it's that added level is the request to make sure that we are public about things. And I guess also as a resident, if there's going to be, the developers expressed that there can be discussions. I'm not even calling them negotiations, but I think that we have to have community discussions about that. Like how is that happening, and who is discussing, and what are they discussing? And I'm asking for the select board to comment about that and what will be done. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think this will be on our, and I think we're all believe in a transparent process and a systematic process. We've talked about a number of things, and this will be on the agenda for our next meeting, just kind of as a follow-up. So I think we're committed to continuing a useful, constructive, and transparent process. I'm not sure at this point we have any specifics to say about it. We've talked a lot about the procedures. Did anyone else have the...
I just wanted to say, I wasn't a part of the site walk, but there was a site walk that Mr. Engel did with
Quite a few people,
with several people.
Yeah.
So
I
I think
think just one from.
Yeah, the site walk was part of the mass housing process. I think, and I'll attempt to come to the defense of the town a little bit
Well,
here.
before you go there, why
Oh.
don't you give us
All
an
right.
opportunity to respond to that? Because understand the concern, resent the implication, though. So yes, Jeff and his team came to talk to Peter and I, and basically was kicking the tires and saying, you know, they had a preliminary design and asked for our feedback, which we gave, and it's very similar to what everybody else has given. You know, concerns about the height, the architecture, the historical buildings, and keeping those. Because Jeff, if I remember correctly, your first design didn't keep the historical buildings, and a number of other things, traffic, number of units. So I said, okay, and then came back and let us know what they were going to submit to mass housing, essentially. So it did not take the place of any type of open discussion. It's not like we helped, I mean, to the extent that, I mean, I will say Jeff, at least when he came back, he had kept a couple of the original mill buildings, you know, which, you know, was great, but it doesn't take the place of the conversation that's happening now or what's happening at the ZBA. So it's not like we entered into any kind of agreement or commitment associated with that. And quite frankly, you probably have more conversations in other towns with people, but we didn't really feel comfortable with that.
Kate, I just want to respond too. Kate, I think that, you know, I can't speak for the select board, but on some level, I think I can. We are very, you know, committed to our community participating in this. And I wish that our community, I wish that we had filled this room and downstairs, and that we had 300, 500 people online. So we are doing everything we can in terms of trying to make it people publicly aware of what's going on, trying to give them the tools to understand what's going on and how they can best have a part and a role in this. I wish that this community had been more involved in the planning and would be more involved in planning meetings that you all do, because that's where real impact could happen. So I'm sorry that we're here. We're here. This plan, it has many positive features to it. Ultimately, it's really a tough thing to do in the middle of our town, to put 250 units there. That's really changing our community forever. And, you know, my husband's family's been here since 1856, so I'm here with a lot of people on my back. But in terms of our doing anything without the public input or wanting and desperately wanting public input just isn't right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I would also say you guys are ahead of most other municipalities relative to, I mean, to have a meeting like this before we even have a site letter is credit to the Board of Selectmen. Also, on any project we're involved with, we reach out to like the planning department just to take the temperature of, hey, we're kind of thinking about a project at this site. This is our credentials. Is there anything we should be aware of? It's not a negotiation like we're going to do this, but you better do that. Or it should be characterized as what it was. It was an informational, it was a casual conversation. I will say the plan before you incorporates a good amount of what we heard. You know, that's important to the town. So there's going to be a lot of meetings about this project. A lot of zoning board meetings. There can be informal meetings. We'll take directive from the town. But I would say I think the town is doing a pretty good job compared to what I've seen in other towns where there's no input, no meetings, just the zoning board, and that's it. So,
all right. Well, thank you, Jeff. I think that I see Joe. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to ask if down the road, to keep the transparency going, as Kate was asking, would you be willing to show up for another public forum at some point in time in the future.
It'll be ZBA.
Well,
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, the only thing I would ask is, what are you asking of us, or should we present? Are we there to listen? What's the, you know, objective? But as I listen, there's easy ways and hard ways to do these things, and ultimately sometimes you end up at the same spot. But it would be stupid and short-sighted of me to be like, yeah, we don't want to do any of that, we don't have to, because it's to my benefit and to the benefit of the project to have input and to have some collaboration. And if you ask me to do something that we can't do, I will just say no, and I'll explain why, and that's just how it will be. But of course I would be open to, you know, hearing additional feedback and the like. I mean, we have a lot of work to do. The traffic, I'd say, what, 50-60% of the comments we heard tonight are traffic related. So even before the zoning board, we can submit our traffic study. You know, I think the town does a nice job of circulating the information that we provide. So that's a very long-winded way to say, yes, we would be open to it.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. And Michael, I think you had a question? All right. So first of all, I want to thank everyone here, Jeff and his development team, and especially the select board, town manager, and especially the citizens who came out tonight. This has been a long meeting. I think there's a lot of great questions and observations. I think this is the beginning of the process for this project. As you can see, we've got a long ways to go. But you know, I'd say we are committed to transparency and communication and discussion, because I think we are all here because we're committed to this community and trying to do the best thing we can. And so hopefully we can come together and make this project as good as possible in this situation. So with that, and I
Rob,
think...
do you want to outline maybe next steps, or do you want me to? Or?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that?
Sure. So we're still in the process of taking comment from the public and then also the boards and committees. And as Rob mentioned, next week at the select board meeting, most of it might be done in exec session, but we will have a public component. You know, our goal, well, we'll definitely have a public component. Our goal is to basically take all of that input and essentially prioritize it. And then at that point, we will assemble what's called a comment letter that basically categorizes or explains all of our concerns with the development. And it will reference different boards and committees and different citizens' concerns. And then we'll also include, you know, the memos that the different boards and committees have sent to us in full, as well as, you know, the citizen comments. So all of that gets sent to Mass Housing. It has to be done by the 29th, I believe, 27th or 29th.
28th or 29th.
And they use that to evaluate the project as a whole and determine whether or not to issue a site eligibility letter. And as Councilor Haverty had mentioned earlier, if they get a site eligibility letter, that gives them the green light to go ahead and file with the Zoning Board of Appeals.
That's great. And the other, just last reminder, you know, you're holding the public comment open until Friday, right?
Yeah,
in the
Friday.
portal. And so, you know, if you want to make detailed comments that you didn't make tonight, feel free to do that. We are also not, I believe, formally recording these comments for tonight, are we, and incorporating?
No, they need to be in the form
Yeah.
if you want to have them incorporated to Mass
So
Housing.
that's good. So keep that in mind. You know, I like, you know, we characterize this as like a listening session, both for us and the citizens and for the developer. So I think it worked well in that sense. So, but please, if you have detailed comments, please make those. Any other comments or thoughts from the board before we adjourn this? So I thank everybody, and this meeting is over. All right, thank you. Adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you all. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.